And let's make sure. Where's the screen at? The YouTube screen.
Did you start the stream?
Yeah, I started it. Should be live.
Okay.
So right now we're just doing a sound check.
Okay, I'll
Checkity
reload your
check.
YouTube page so I can click on the stream there.
Sound chickity check chicken. Chinese chicken. Check chickity check. Check Izzle.
I think there's maybe a bit of a delay for the start of the
Yeah.
stream on your YouTube page for me.
Yeah, there's probably going to be somewhat of a delay.
Okay. I'll just reload the page again here.
Okay.
What song is that from? Chinese chicken. Do, 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 do.
Bare naked ladies.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Chickadee China and the Chinese chicken.
Yeah. I still don't. Oh, there we go. There's the stream.
Good. You can hear it.
Yeah, I'll just mute myself here so I can check the audio there.
Yeah, I heard the feedback. All right, Chickadee China. Test, 1, 2, 3. We are live. Liver than a Mad Hatter. A Black Adder. Liver than Black Lives Matter. Blood splatter. Are you able to hear the audio? Is you're like muted or something?
Oh, I had it muted. I'll have to just check it again here.
Sure. Sound check, audio check. Check. All right, we're good.
Yeah, we're good.
All right, we're operational. Battleship operational.
Yes.
So, we are convening today in communion to speak about one of the best video game adaptations in the history of video game adaptations. We're here to talk about Castlevania Season 1. This came out 4 years ago, July 2017, and it was directed by Sam Ellis. And this script had been crafted, at least started way back in 2007. So,
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, this was a project a decade in the making. But Sam Ellis, I believe he's a comic book author. So this kind of, this is right up his alley. So, Castlevania. How familiar were you with Castlevania before watching Castlevania?
I actually never played any of the games, so I didn't really know anything about it. The first time I watched it, at least. Well, I knew that the games existed, but I had never played any of them before.
Okay, you hadn't played any of them or you hadn't seen them? None of the above?
Yeah, none of the above.
Okay. So yeah, the Castlevania games do stem back to the NES. Well, even the arcade. I believe the first Castlevania game was an arcade cabinet.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. The first time I remember hearing about the games was the first PlayStation.
Yeah, so the arcade cabinet game, it's actually not called Castlevania. It's called something else. I forgot the name, but when they ported this game over to the Nintendo Entertainment System, that's when the name Castlevania was adopted.
Oh, okay.
So,
What was it called before?
you know what? That's a good question. Um, I'll have to look it up really quick.
Yeah, I'm gonna look it
And it's
up
called a
too.
Castlevania arcade game. Let's see what it was called. Because I know in Japan it was called something different. Okay, it was called Haunted Castle.
Haunted Castle.
Yeah,
Okay.
Haunted Castle
Oh,
is the arcade game.
when I search it, it says Ak Aku. When I search
Akumaju Dracula. Yeah,
yeah,
that's the
Okomaju Dracula, and it says
Akumaju
Devil's Castle
Dracula.
Dracula.
Akumaju Dracula is the Japanese name for Castlevania. Actually, in Japan, none of these games actually have Castlevania in the title. So the Castlevania title is purely a Western thing.
Oh, okay. Are they all called Akomaju Dracula or something
Yeah,
similar?
yeah. All of the games in the Japan are called Akumaju Dracula.
Okay.
Yeah, none of them are called Castlevania.
Okay.
Ex so, yeah, the games span from the NES up to modern day consoles. I think the last Castlevania game may have been a mobile release, but there were releases for the last generation of game systems. And there was like a fighting game, but I think that was PC only. That was probably the most recent game that had been released was a fighting game.
A Castlevania fighting game?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Believe it or not.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it has a pretty long history and there are tons and tons of different games. So yeah, just talking about that fighting game, it's called Castlevania Judgment.
Okay.
And that one was released. No, this isn't the most recent game then. Castlevania Judgment was a Wii game,
Oh, okay.
but the most recent I think is Castlevania Lord of Shadows 2, which was on the last generation of consoles. Let's see, Lord of Shadows 2, and that came out in 2014. So basically, this came out 3 years before the animated series came out. So,
Okay.
and
When I searched, what is the most recent Castlevania game? It says Castlevania Anniversary Collection. Is that like a compilation of a bunch of different ones?
yeah, that's just a compilation. So it's not really a new game. They just took a bunch of old games and slapped them together.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it kind of looks like arcade animation
Yeah,
on the cover of it.
yeah, and I actually have that. It's on my Xbox One, and it has all of the older Castlevania games.
Oh, cool.
So it has even games from the Game Boy. So I think I don't think it has Symphony of the Night on it. I could be mistaken, but I think it goes up to Super Castlevania in that series.
Okay. So, what does the is the gameplay style different between the classic like arcade style and Nintendo games in comparison to the newer generation games? Because I think like I might have seen one of my friends play it or something, and I seem to remember like the PlayStation or PS2 generation of Castlevania games being the standard, like you're going around in a 3D environment and like slaying demons and hunting monsters and shit like that.
Yeah, so for the first half of Castlevania's history, most of the games were side-scrolling platformers.
Okay.
And when the game Castlevania Symphony of the Night came out, it actually created a new genre, which the genre is called a Metroidvania. It's a weird mashup between two types of games. So you have the Metroid formula, which is to um, traverse a large map and backtrack between areas. So it's not a series of stages. You're just in a very large open map that you walk around and look for secrets and stuff.
So
Uh,
Metroid is in the Metroid Prime games with Samus.
yeah, so when I say Metroid, I'm hearkening back to the original Metroid and Super Metroid, and a lot of those games, if you go back to the very like earliest incarnations, those maps were huge, and it was one of those games where it was a huge map. Because in the older style games, a lot of them just had sequential levels. You beat level one, you beat level two, you beat level three. In Metroid, it's just a huge map that you explore and traverse, and you kind of have to figure out where things are and look for secrets and explore.
Like Zelda too, eh?
Yeah, kind of like Zelda
No,
too.
like the one starting with N64, I guess. The original Zelda were like scrolling style too, weren't they?
Well, the original Zeldas were overhead in
Oh
orientation,
yeah, it was
except
like
for Zelda 2 had some sequences where you're doing some side scrolling.
oh okay.
But
Was it
yeah, it's
was it like kind of the earlier Pokemon game style, like you said, overhead view? I think because
for
I think I
Zelda,
played.
yes.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, none of the Castlevania games though were overhead. They're always either side scroll or third like a 3D action.
Okay. Yeah, I mean the Zelda games because I was just thinking about how I had like one of the like a remake of one of the original Nintendo Zelda games on my Nintendo 3DS.
Hmm.
Yeah, but okay, that's
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah. So, yeah, the 3D games that you might be familiar with, they're very much like God of War. I don't know if you're familiar with that franchise,
Yeah.
where you're kind of roaming around and you're fighting in a kind of 3D environment. But those would be like the Lord of Shadow games, and there are a couple Xbox and PlayStation games as well as an N64 game that went into the 3D style. But concurrently, while these 3D games were out, they were still releasing 2D games for mobile platforms like the Game Boy Advance and a number of different handheld systems. So a lot of
Oh
the
yeah.
handheld systems would stick to the original 2D style, while the newer 3D capable systems would advance the series into three dimensions.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, some of my favorite Castlevania games are like on the handheld systems
Oh, okay.
because they kind of continued the tradition of 2D Castlevania.
So do you prefer the like the older style 2D Castlevania games then?
Well, I'd say my favorite Castlevania in the series is one of those older style games. Um, it's basically my favorite game in the series is the game that coined that genre, Metroidvania, and that would be Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And that game stars Alucard. So a lot of these games do have either Belmont's Alucard or some, offspring thereof. you know. So now getting into the
Wait,
adaptation.
so the how come a Castlevania game spawned a genre that's called Metroid, whatever you said it was.
Metroidvania.
Yeah,
Okay, so I think I've explained like the Metroid part of it.
yeah.
So the Vania part of it is that they the in this iteration of the game in Symphony of the Night, so it had the big explorable map like a Metroid does. So what they added into the Vania sense is they added a character in which you can level up. So your character can level up, and that was kind of a first when they combined that genre. So the combination of leveling up your character and um, having this large explorable map with a lot of secrets.
Oh, okay. So that like did that like lead to RPGs kind of?
Yeah, so if you really think about it, Castlevania is somewhat of a side-scrolling RPG. However, it's very light on the RPG because you don't have talk to a bunch of NPCs and go on quests or anything. It's mostly like a hardcore 2D adventure game.
Okay.
But your character does grow stronger when you kill enemies. Up until that point, most games you would just, well, at least in the Castlevania sense, you would just find power ups that made your whip stronger, but your character would not advance in levels. So in the previous Castlevania games, if you had a really strong whip and you got hit a bunch of times, you would lose that power up.
Oh, okay. So
So you're
were games in the Castlevania series some of the first like that one you mentioned like the first video games in general to have the concept of being able to level up your characters?
No,
No?
that definitely not. It just so happens that the Metroidvania genre is a mashup. So you have elements from Metroid, and then you're putting together with elements of Castlevania. It's almost if the Metroidvania genre is almost a misnomer because the Vania element really isn't Castlevania specific. So you can make a Metroidvania game that had nothing to do with Gothic horror. As we know, Castlevania kind of revolves around Gothic horror and, vampires and monsters of those types of persuasions. But you can make a Metroidvania game that has nothing to do with Castlevania at all.
Like
So
Zelda, right?
right, there are modern
Like
takes
I
on
mean
Metroid.
starting with like Ocarina of Time and after that.
Well, Ocarina of Time is just like an adventure game. So the
Oh,
Metroidvanias
okay.
specifically have to be 2D side scrolling.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so it has to be a 2D side scroller, has to have a large map, and has to have some type of experience system. And I believe you also have to have the ability to collect items as well.
Okay.
So that's the genre, Metroidvania genre in a nutshell. But yeah, that my favorite game in Castlevania would be Symphony of the Night, where you play as Alucard. That's not the first time you play as Alucard in the Castlevania um, series of games. It's the first one I played where you play as Alucard, but the first one you play on as Alucard is actually Castlevania 3. And segueing, the Castlevania series is based off of Castlevania 3, which
The
is,
anime series, you mean?
yeah, so it's based
Okay.
off of the third game in the series. Interesting
Oh, okay.
enough, the third game is a prequel to 1 and 2.
That's
So,
interesting. I was gonna ask that because like see the start of season one example, or for example, I'm sure we'll get into this more, but I really like the story about how the woman I forget what her name is, but she married Dracula and convinced him to have faith in humanity. And then she was burned at the stake for being a witch. And then he decided to take vengeance on the whole human race, which is a very interesting backstory for Dracula being a bloodthirsty monster.
Yes, and we see that they kind of approach the character of Dracula with a little bit of nuance. He's a scientist. He's not exactly like the murderer and killer you think he is when you first meet him. I know he acts a little bit of creepy in the beginning, but it's funny because the woman, she's just like, whatever, I just want to learn how to be a better doctor, you know. So, going straight into things, like the series basically opens up with Lisa, who eventually becomes Dracula's wife, and she goes to Dracula, and she wants to become an actual healer.
Hmm.
She doesn't want to become like a charlatan healer selling snake oil. She wants to be a legitimate healer, or a
Right,
legitimate doctor of some sort.
right.
So she goes to Dracula to plead for his assistance to teach her how to do this, and Dracula is basically like, you see all of this around you, it's science. So it's interesting because there's a melding in the series of magic and science, and
Yeah.
it's hard to tell what is what.
And I
And I
like
think
the I
that's
like how that's sort of involved in what very quickly becomes this sort of false dichotomy between science and religion. Like science is seen as evil demon magic, and then some of the religious characters, for sure, for example, like that guy who's responsible for what's her name, Lisa?
Lisa, yes.
Yeah, for burning Lisa at the stake and bringing the reign of this whole demon of Dracula's whole demon army upon this town. He's clearly like a pretty fucking evil and fucked up character. And then there are these other priests who are going around like snatching people up and beating up that old man who are clearly cast as bad people too. And it's not really like science versus religion. It's more nuanced than that.
Right. So the setting of this series is Wallachia, I guess Wallachia is. And Wallachia is a real historical region, and it existed in Romania. So in this story, it's the year is 1475. So um, so they begin a relationship, and then we immediately cut to um, this city called Targo Viste, which is like a real actual city that you can find on the map. And you see Lisa tied to a stake, and there's a conversation between a clergyman and I think the mayor of the city, and they're kind of discussing what they uncovered when they found her, and they talked about how there were devil machines in her house, and she called the devil machines science, whatever they were. So we're probably talking like maybe she had some type of lab or some sort. Who knows? They actually get more into this in season two, so we'll eventually get there. Because I know you haven't seen
Okay.
season two yet, right?
No, not yet.
Okay. Season two, I haven't finished season four, but season two is my favorite season. I'm not saying like the other seasons are bad. It's just season two is just super badass.
Awesome.
um, as she's getting burnt, she's pleading. She says, she pleads to Dracula not to hurt them. And while she's doing this, like the bishop is like, oh, she's talking to the devil. pleading with the devil not to hurt us, and they're kind of
Yeah.
flippant about that. So we cut to Dracula. He's just like walking along, trying to live life as a human. And he returns to his wife's home, and she finds it burnt up. And he's trying to figure out what's going on. And there's an old woman who was there, who happened to be, I guess, one of his wife's patients. And she said that some church officials came and snatched her up, and she said that they were going to burn her at the stake.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see Dracula crying blood tears coming from his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then at that point, he says he will no longer travel as a man.
And then he turns into monster demon Dracula.
Yeah, he starts turning into Demon Dracula, like right in front of this old lady. And the old lady, like, takes out the cross and it does nothing.
Yep.
Like, absolutely nothing to Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
But Dracula doesn't want to hurt her because he knows that, one, she told him about his wife, and she was very sympathetic about what was happening with his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And he knows that, hey, she was an ally. I'm not going to kill her.
Right.
This person was probably very good friends with my wife. So he
Yeah.
takes that information and he goes to go find his wife.
And he does his magic Dracula teleporting thing.
Yes, which
Yeah.
is something he does in the games when you
That's
fight
pretty
him.
cool.
Yeah, he does that. So,
One thing about the plot that I noticed rewatching it that was interesting is that I think I kind of totally forgot a lot of the details of the plot in season one. I remembered the basic concept about vampire hunters hunting Dracula, but that's
mhm.
basically all I remembered. And then I mistook some of the details for Vampire Hunter D because I think it was so long ago that I first watched season one of Castlevania
Mhm.
that I then watched Vampire Hunter D before we talked about it. And then of course, way more recently, I rewatched season one of Castlevania, and I was watching it and remembered, holy crap, I don't remember any of these details. I thought they were all Vampire Hunter D details.
Yeah, well, it came out 4 years ago, so it's understandable. I even was very fuzzy about the plot until I rewatched it recently. But and I'm even fuzzy about the plot for second season. I know like the badass battles. I knew the badass battles for this season. I just didn't remember like the whole plot and what was going on. So
Okay.
eventually Dracula appears in Targo Viste like as a burning skull face. And the bishop thinks he's like Satan, like literally Satan. And Dracula is there to demand answers. And the mayor makes a comment that Dracula is a myth. So they kind of know about him, but they didn't really think he was a real thing until he showed up. So he's in the city, big burning skull face.
Yeah, like we
He's
don't remember this big burning skull face in the fire a year ago.
Yes. The bishop holds a cross to the big burning skull face. Of course, it does nothing. Dracula seems to be immune to crucifixes, and the bishop just basically tells the skull face, "You are not real."
Yeah,
He's kind of in denial about what's going on. So because of their transgressions, Dracula tells the Wallachians that they have 1 year basically to leave because he's going to destroy the city or destroy Wallachia. and as he's leaving, he unleashes some type of firestorm on the city.
Yeah.
It's not like a huge like destruction deal, but he does release some looks like meteors, which is one of his other abilities from the games. Um, so the reason why he gave them a year is because it's going to take him 1 year to summon his army. And there's another scene where Alucard attempts to stop his father. Well, we don't even know it's Alucard at this point, but that's who it is. Dracula's son comes to convince him not to destroy Wallachia. And he has a pretty good reason. He's not a full vampire, so he's in both the human world and the vampire world. So it's almost like he has all the strengths of the vampire and none of the weaknesses. So he's basically Blade.
Yeah, it's awesome.
um, so they get into a fight, it looks like, and it just kind of quickly like cuts away. So we don't really know what happens there. Next thing, we cut into Wallachia 1476. So it's a 1 year later already. And we have this weird, like, fat bishop dude sitting in I don't know, what are those things called? Those, like, chairs that are moved by people,
Oh,
like a
like a
sedan chair.
yeah, I forget what they're called.
Like, he's, like, sitting in one of those things, and he's, like,
Yeah,
celebrating.
and people
Like,
are
oh,
yeah, people are carrying his big throne. Yeah.
yeah, they're, like, celebrating the death of Dracula's wife on the day that she died, which is probably like the stupidest thing they could ever do. And then during their little celebration, it starts raining blood and everybody freaks the hell out. Basically, in short, all hell breaks loose. And Dracula appears and he's like, "What the F? You guys are celebrating the very day and that spells your destruction today." And then he
Yep.
starts to unleash on the city. And we see just like a bunch of people get destroyed
Yep.
in some very gory and bloody manner. This
Yeah, the
show is not for
demons like
kids, by the
no,
way.
it's definitely not, man. Demons like fucking rip people apart and shit, man. It's pretty gruesome.
Yeah, it's pretty gory, pretty visceral, like literally visceral. Um, yeah, they don't pull the punches when it comes to the blood and gore in this show.
No.
So a bunch of
That's one of the cool things about anime actually, that they can be so phenomenally violent in like an easier way than a live action thing.
yeah, it's a lot cheaper, right?
Yeah.
So they get a bunch of people get murked by the demon horde that um, descends on the city. And then we see like literal rivers of blood flowing through the city. I think even that fat bishop guy takes like a sword, like a. It almost seems like a Final Destination-esque death. He kind of accidentally gets killed by like a giant shard of glass, like straight in the middle of his chest or something like that.
Yeah.
Pretty gruesome. But as the scene ends, Dracula says, "Kill for my love." And basically, this whole thing is because they killed his wife.
Yep.
If they
The
didn't,
most giant over emotional overreaction of revenge as a response that you can possibly imagine. You
yeah, he's
killed my wife, so
basically.
I'm going to eradicate the entire human race, bitch.
Well, it's almost, but like, it makes sense because his wife is the only reason why he left humanity alone.
Yeah, it was the only reason he had faith. He gave any faith and had any faith in humanity whatsoever, right?
Yeah, it was because of his wife, and now that she's gone, she sees. It's almost like they're making the contrast that these. I don't know how. I guess this is basically like Sam Harris's fetish. This show. He would probably watch this and be like, "Yeah, look at all these stupid religious people. They caused all this crap."
Religion may try to eradicate the human race.
Yeah, this season one at least is not kind to Christianity
No.
at all. So yeah, little rivers of blood. So as that scene closes, we go into a bar, and then there's some men having a spirited conversation. Um, and a man tells another drunken man a story about hitting a man with a shovel.
Yeah, because
If I'm not mistaken.
he was fucking his goat or something,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. A man. I guess it was some type of employee of his, or I don't even think it was an employee. I think it was a relative. I'm not, but a relative or somebody fucked this goat, so he hit him with a shovel.
Yeah.
Um, and then they start talking about kind of current events, and they heard that some city got overrun and that a horde of demons is on its way. And then they start blaming everything on the nobles. And a noble family they specifically talk about is the Belmonts, and he just starts talking shit. And they
Yep.
cut to one of the Belmonts, and then boom, that episode ends.
Yep.
So episode two immediately starts right back in the bar. Um, and there's just a bunch of, they're just talking and squabbling, you know, small folk stuff. And I think like the ringleader tells everyone, yeah, we all came from shit and look at us. And then they're basically talking shit about the wealthy and the noble class. So Belmont, he gets up and he's drunk as hell, and he goes to the bar to order another drink.
Oh, did you notice like I noticed in the credits, but also recognized his voice that Belmont is voiced by Richard Armitage, Armitage or whoever you say his last name, who's Thorin in the Hobbit trilogy. And
Is he?
yeah, yeah, he's
Thorin. Oh yeah, I did
the
notice in the
main
credits. I just didn't put two and two together.
like the main hero Hobbit in the Hobbit trilogy movies, and then he also plays the the other serial killer who sees himself as the Red Dragon in the Red Dragon movie in the Hannibal Lecter series and the book.
Oh, okay.
Well,
I'm looking
obviously
at
he doesn't
his.
play the character in the book, but yeah.
Yeah, I think in the Hobbit movies, he's the dwarf that has like two axes.
No,
He's always.
he's the
Oh, he's the main one.
yeah, Thorin Oakenshield.
Oh no, yeah, he's the main dwarf.
Yeah.
He's the one that goes mad with power and envy, and then
Hmm.
sees the error of his ways. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I just pulled it up right now. Yeah. Okay, I didn't notice that. He does a very good job voice acting this character.
Yeah,
Belmont is a cynical son of a bitch.
he sure is. Yeah.
um, so while he's trying to get his beer or whatever he's going to drink, one of the townies recognizes the Belmont crest on his chest.
Hmm.
Belmont insists that he doesn't know anything about the crest, but they are not having it. So um, he's accused of practicing black magic and summoning monsters. and we find out that he was banished and excommunicated by the church. So
His
these
whole family, right?
townies, yeah, his whole family. So they're kind of a disgraced noble family that has completely fallen from grace.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of see it. The dude's just in a bar, drunk, wandering around, and he's basically a vagabond at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So they get into an argument. He basically admits finally that he is a Belmont, and then the fight starts. So the fight is actually pretty even.
Yeah.
Um, he gets pretty messed up, but he messes everybody up. I know he has a hard time with one of the bigger dudes, and he
Mm-hmm.
actually gets kicked out, I think. No, he doesn't
Yeah.
get kicked out, he leaves, right?
I think he gets kicked out.
Yeah, he either gets kicked out or he leaves. So we see the guy and we're like, who's this guy? If you don't know Castlevania, you're not real like I know probably when you first watched this, you're like, who is this dude? Of
Mm-hmm.
course I'm nerding out. I already knew who it was. So
Right.
at that point I already knew that was the hero of the story. So it's different from people who are familiar versus those who are unfamiliar with what's going on. Um,
Yeah.
so we see that he leaves this bar. Um, One of the things I noticed during the bar fight too is he gets kicked in the balls a bunch of times.
Yeah.
Did you notice that? He got
Yeah.
kicked in the balls like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah. They fight dirty.
Um, and when he leaves the bar, he just like vomits. And it's not really clear when you see him outside of the bar if he had won the fight or not. They make it pretty
Yeah.
ambiguous. We
Yeah.
don't know exactly
Yeah. Like
how
you
it
said,
ended.
like he beats the fuck out of a bunch of them, but then he gets thrown out of the bar and kind of gets beaten up a lot too, right?
Yeah, he gives it, he dishes it out and he takes it. Like he it's not like, oh, this guy's just kicking everyone's ass. That's not the case in this bar fight. He's definitely
Right.
getting pretty jacked up too. So after the
Mm-hmm.
fight, we see him sleeping under the tree like a vagabond. Um, and then he's traveling and he happens upon the town of Greshit.
Right.
I know they say it can kind of some weird way, but this is like a real town. It exists, I believe. And
Okay.
he's observing it from afar, and we could see that there's kind of like monsters running around on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, he ends up entering the city through what he describes as a shit pipe.
Yeah.
He goes through the sewer to get into the city. But as he gets in there, the city is pretty run down. There's mass graves. Everyone is just barely scraping by here. I don't even know why he would want to come to a city like this, but hey,
He
I
just
think,
came there to get some food for breakfast, right?
yeah, he basically is looking for breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good way to start by traveling through some shit-filled sewers, but it is what it is. Um,
Yep.
you notice that there's these people in the city called speakers, and he's familiar with them. Um, well, people are talking about the speakers, and he's kind of, I guess, eavesdropping on people's conversations, and he learns of this sleeping soldier story, and and then that some people still believe that the bishop can save them. So, next thing, he's walking through an alley, and it looks like an older man is being accosted. by some what you would think were thugs, but it just so happens that the people he's being accosted by are like clergymen and priests. So Trevor steps
Yeah.
in. He says, "quote I really, really don't like priests," and he uses his whip to disarm one of the priests, and I believe he takes the finger off of one that was holding a
Yeah.
weapon.
Yeah.
He gives the priests a chance to leave, but the priests are insistent in starting a fight. So one of the bald priests takes out like this dagger, like shaped as a cross, and charges at Trevor. And then Trevor smacks him in the face with the whip, and bye bye goes the dude's eyeball. He just smacked the eyeball out of the guy's head.
Yeah.
Uh,
His whip is cool too, because it's like an Indiana Jones weapon for vampire slayers.
yeah, he is. I think that whole gimmick with the whip was actually influenced by Indiana Jones because the first game came
Oh,
out
cool.
after, at least after the first movie. I'm not sure when the second movie came out. Probably even after the second movie, because we're still talking
Okay.
like the early 80s here.
Yeah.
Um, so I think Indiana Jones actually has a pretty big influence on the whip. So after all said and
That's
done,
cool. They do like go and investigate ancient ruins and stuff too, right?
um,
A
there
little
is
bit when they
some of
find
that.
when
Yeah,
they find the sleeping
the
savior, for
underground.
example.
Yeah, when he goes through
Yeah.
the catacombs, yes, there is some a little bit of a little bit of Indiana Jones-esque exploration.
Yeah. Looks like
So,
Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom came out in 1984, by the way.
okay, so that's around the same time that the first Castlevania game came out.
Cool.
So, he picks up the old man and he says, he told Trevor that the violence wasn't necessary, but it is appreciated. The old man introduced
Yeah.
himself as a speaker, and Trevor seems to know all about speakers already. And speakers are pacifists, so they're kind of like the
Hmm.
Tinkers from the Wheel of Time in a way.
Yeah, a little bit.
They practice the way of the leaf.
Hmm.
So, as it is of
They should
now,
be like the Aiel and start using spears instead.
so the speakers are being blamed for the monster attacks in the city. And Trevor's not really doesn't really know what's going on, but the speakers tell Trevor that the this is all because Dracula's wife has been killed. So,
Right.
because it sounds like Trevor hasn't really been connected to much of the world. He's just traveling from here to there. He's not really into demon slaying at the moment. Um, but anyway, the speakers start to talk about that sleeping soldier myth, and at first he's like kind of skeptical of this story. But we do find out that the
Yeah.
Belmonts are very familiar with magic. Um, but he really wants to get these speakers out of the city because he's been hearing things that these speakers are being blamed for these monster attacks. And um, I think he really likes the speakers, One of the main reasons is because the Belmonts are well versed in lore and history, and so are the speakers. So they have like a kind of a kinship there when it comes to knowledge,
Yeah.
history, and things of the arcane. So the elder speaker tells tells Trevor that his grandchild is missing. That's the main reason that they're sticking around. So, in order to expedite the process, Belmont volunteers to go look for the missing grandchild, on the condition that if he finds this grandchild, that they leave the city. And that is the end of episode 2. So we're halfway through here already.
It's a short season.
Yeah, it's only 4 episodes. So, opening of episode 3, Trevor goes to the catacombs where the elder's grandchild was last known to have gone, and he finds a warm pipe in this weird catacomb. We also see electricity, right? Electric powered lights, and this is like
Seemingly,
1476. So
yeah, seemingly like automated light.
yeah, we're like, okay, this is strange. As a viewer, you're like, yeah, this is weird. Um, and while he's going through the catacombs, he falls through the floor. It seems to be brittle and whatnot. So, when he's walking through this area, he sees a bunch of statues. Statues of different warriors, and then he finds one that's a statue of the speaker. It's like, And as he sees this, a monster comes out. And what monster would this be? You're muted, Andrew.
A giant cyclops that turns people to stone with its eye ray. Am
Yes,
I?
and yes, that's what comes out. Well, you're good now.
Are you
You're
sure I'm
unmuted.
muted?
No, you
Oh,
were
okay.
muted. You're
Okay.
not muted
Okay.
anymore. Um,
Okay.
yes, and this is actually one of the bosses in the Castlevania games. I don't remember it actually turning you to stone. I don't think it does that in the game, but you do fight a giant cyclops. That is for sure. So we have kind of a pretty
Cool.
epic battle here. The only thing I wrote about the battle is I wrote, Trevor is a badass. That's all I
Yeah,
wrote. Um, I will have to say that all the fight scenes are pretty damn awesome in the show. Uh,
definitely.
I there's only one that I think is worthy of description. Not saying that none of them are, but it's so badass that we'll talk about it in more detail. But in this fight, it is pretty damn badass. You just got to watch it and see it. So after he kills the Cyclops, the statues start to revert, and the speaker statue reverts from its stone, and it's a woman, and she collapses. And he revives her, and he tries to convince her to leave these catacombs. She introduces herself as Sypha Belnades. She's a legit character from the game. So one thing to note, in Castlevania 3,
Okay.
um, it had a unique mechanic where you can switch between characters. And Sypha
Cool.
is one of the characters that you can switch between.
Oh, okay.
So she's a major protagonist from the game. Um, so he convinces her to leave, but she's um, wants to stay because she needs to find the sleeping soldier. But eventually,
Yeah.
he tells her that, hey, there's some shit happening. We got to get out of the city. So
Hmm.
he goes back up topside, meets with the speakers, and of course, the elder is extremely happy that his granddaughter has returned. And he he basically talks to the speakers and tells them something is fishy as fuck with this catacomb. It looks like
Yeah.
exactly like the inside of Dracula's castle.
Exactly.
Yeah, so he, since that is the case, he believes that the sleeping soldier tale was just a trap to have people go in there to get murdered.
That's a
Um,
trap.
yeah, simply because, hey, this looks like Dracula's castle. There's no way in hell you're gonna find anything beneficial here. It's just a murder place. You know, but we don't need to get into this sleeping soldier business. It's bad news. Um,
Hmm.
so while they're talking, um, their house, but I believe gets surrounded after he leaves, and then he gets captured by a number of priests. The priests are to take him to the
Hmm.
Bishop of Greshet, and he's the target. And then we find out that the Bishop of
Yeah.
Gresset was the same guy from Targoviste who oversaw the murder of Dracula's wife. Um, and instead of,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, so they have an exchange, and the bishop tells the Belmont to get out of the city. Um, he tells Belmont his plan is that he's basically going to round up the speakers and murderize them, and that he better not be there. I don't know why exactly he spared Belmont in this instance, um, but he did. I don't know if it makes sense plot wise. What do you think? Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about that. I was like, why is he sparing Belmont? I just couldn't really think of why specifically, to be honest. But maybe he's just not as murderous as we think he is. I don't know. But we find out that the bishop is basically a religious zealot,
Yeah.
and he has,
I mean, there could be maybe like some lingering respect because the Belmonts used to be noble servants of the church, but I mean, it seems more likely that he would have that animosity that he seems to display to the Belmonts.
yeah, I know that the Belmonts were excommunicated, and he kind of like cynically says, like, what am I, why am I here? Where we've been excommunicated. Like he's not even supposed to step into a church. Um,
Hmm.
which is basically like blasphemy if you're excommunicated and you step into a church. But he makes an exception. Um, so what happens is the Belmont goes back to the speakers to make sure that they fulfill their bargain. but the elder flips the script on Belmont.
Yeah.
He convinces Belmont that they need to be here, they need to help the people, and that there has to be some other way. Um, but they do formulate a plan, and the plan is that Belmont's going to distract while they get away, at least to temporary safety. So as they're leaving, Belmont and the speakers are surrounded, or at least they're at the place where they were kind of staying at, which was like a rundown building. And the mob breaks down the door. And when they break down the door, Trevor's alone. He's by himself.
Yep.
And the mob wants to know where all the speakers went. He doesn't tell them, but we do see that the speakers are in the catacombs.
Yeah.
So he explains to the mob that the Belmonts have always sacrificed themselves for the sake of Wallachia. He's pretty much offended that they would do something like this. And Trevor takes a look at the priests and he says, are these priests, do priests carry weapons like this?
Yeah.
And he immediately starts taking out. Yeah, the priests seem to be the ones that are aggravating the mob. They're aggravating and leading the mob. So the first thing that Trevor does is he starts taking the priests out.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty epic fight with the priests. I know there's a part where he's running through an alley and he kind of just casually kills these priests. It's like so easy for him when he's not drunk.
He does it in such a cool way too. Like kill this, maim this guy, use this guy as a human shield against the archer. Shoot that. Have the archer shoot the guy that he's holding as a human shield, and then shoot that guy.
Yeah, because I know the bald priest makes a comeback, right? He kills the bald priest.
Yeah,
because the bald priest, he uses it as a human shield, right? And then he gets a spear from one of the priests, and he chucks the spear at the archer and kills him. It's like, dude, this guy's like a freaking Olympic.
Yeah,
it's like he was doing the decathlon. He was just killing by so many different means. Because he had a sword at this point too. So
he's like the vampire hunter John Wick.
Yeah, I also wrote another note. Trevor is a badass. So while he's trying to escape, we see night creatures and they appear. Oh, night creatures. And then we get into episode 4. So we're almost done here, folks. So this is pretty creepy. The bishop is in his church. And then we see this crazy looking night creature come in. And they have like a philosophical discussion with the night creature.
And then eat him alive.
Yeah, so the bishop is, of course, not really... He thinks he's ultimately protected by God. But the night creatures explain to him that they have love for the bishop, because if it wasn't for the bishop, they wouldn't be there. He is the whole impetus of what's going on.
Yep.
And he says he wants to kiss the bishop, but he ends up eating the bishop.
Yeah. Pretty creative in the way they do that too. They just have these fucking gruesome slurping noises, and the camera pans to the wall or something, and you just see blood. You just see like the back of the demon, and then blood from the body falling in front of him.
Yes. So Bishop gets eaten, and Next, we cut to Trevor. He's getting cornered by the mob. And right before it looks like it's desperate, Sypha comes in and uses her magic to protect Trevor. So during this fight, he addresses the crowd and exposes how hypocritical the priests are. He starts to win the crowd over, and the mob starts attacking the priests because he explains to the mob that all of this night creature business is the fault of the church. So the mob turns on the church and they start murdering these priests. And this is probably where Sam Harris would be clapping and cheering, and this is probably would be his favorite part of the show had he watched it. So once the priests are dispatched, Trevor starts to command the crowd, and he's preparing them for the oncoming battle. So he asks if there are any real priests. One does step forward, and he asks the priest to make some holy water. Because I'm pretty sure the fake priests didn't have the ability to make holy water. Yeah. So he begins to instruct the crowd on what they need to do strategically to fight these demons. He lets them know that there are specific weapons that will assist. So that would include salt. I guess salt really does a number on demons.
That seems like a common thing, eh?
Yeah, I think that kind of date back to Bram Stoker, right? Consecrated salt is kind of like one of the things that works against Dracula. Or at least it protects. It protects,
Isn't there something about that with Dresden and the Dresden Files, too?
I'm trying to think of salt in Dresden Files.
I don't remember the specific example.
Yeah, he uses salt to make a circle. I know that.
Yeah.
I think it's the same concept, because I know in Dracula, salt is used as a protective barrier from vampires. But so next thing we got, they prepare the crowd, and they are quite successful in fighting these demons, but after they kind of rout the demons for the most part, they fall through a hole in the floor.
Yeah.
Trevor and Sypha fall through a hole. Because we see that the weapons that they're using against these demons was really freaking effective. They were actually, all they had to do was stab the demons with these salt swords and they basically explode. And then the holy water is basically like xenomorph acid. You pour that stuff on a demon and they just like melt into nothing. So they fell back into the catacombs and we see some platforming action. Now, what does this mean? Platforming action. That's what you do in a in like a side-scrolling video game. You jump ledges and you like jump, and that's basically, it gets very video gaming here. They're jumping on things and swinging on things ropes that are
jumping on things that are crumbling and falling, and then like you taking turns using his whip.
Yeah, so it's very much harkens back to the games. The level in many of the Castlevania games, there is a clock tower level. So this area is actually very reminiscent of that clock tower level. And usually the clock tower level is a couple levels before the end of the game. So I know what you're trying to do. you Castlevania folks here that made this show, you're definitely throwing this in as an Easter egg. You're throwing in the clock tower. So it's not an actual
Oh,
clock
cool.
tower, but you do see clockwork in this
Right,
section of the in the catacombs.
right.
So they're like trying to get around. Everything's crumbling, and eventually they just fall down and they hit the bottom. And it's in this very nice looking room. They find like a casket, and the blonde man floats out of the casket, and Trevor calls the blonde man a vampire.
Hmm.
So,
And he's right.
so the vampire is very familiar with the Vilmonts. Um, and then Trevor explains that he was very apathetic about everything that was going on regarding like the night creatures and everything else, because the vampire is like, oh, it's a Belmont, this is kind of your thing, right? And
Hmm.
he's like, oh, well, I was kind of not caring about any of this stuff until now. So, um, Belmont wants to kill the vampire. Of course, that's what he does.
Yeah.
And I don't know who calls him this. I don't know if Sypha or I think it was Sypha who called the vampire floating vampire Jesus, or it might have been
Right. Yeah. Something like
Trevor who
that.
called him floating vampire Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we get to see an extremely badass fight. So I'll need to explain
Hmm.
some things about this fight and how they correlate with the games. So a lot of Alucard's abilities. Okay, so that's who he is. This is Alucard, the son of Dracula. Many of the
Hmm.
abilities showcased in this fight are actually not from the game in which this was based, if that makes sense.
Oh.
So many of the
Okay.
abilities showcased are actually from the Symphony of the Night game that I talked about, which is my favorite of the games. So he has the floating sword. That's something he has in Symphony of Night. He has this like teleport-ish ability where he kind of just zips around with this kind of red aura. That's definitely from Symphony of the Night. He doesn't look like Symphony of the Night Alucard. Symphony of the Night Alucard has white hair. So I guess they're trying to make a distinction here between the Symphony of the Night version and this version that they have here with blonde hair. But man, is this a badass fight? They are
Hmm.
pretty
Okay.
evenly matched. There's this one section that I was thought was pretty badass where Alucard was just like floating in the air, and Belmont is just like he's basically using the whip for the majority of this fight. And there's a section where he thumbs his whip so that the whip gets leverage around his hand and it changes direction and it smacks Alucard out of the air. I was like, wow, that's a pretty
Yeah.
interesting use of a whip. I was like, wow,
Yeah.
you made stuff interesting here. Um,
Hmm.
Eventually, they get to a stalemate where Alucard has him pinned, and Alucard seemingly has the upper hand, but it also looks like Trevor has a dagger waiting to stake him in the heart. But
Yeah.
before
So it's
that, I just
basically a
want to,
Mexican standoff.
yeah, before that, I do want to mention there's this very funny thing that happens during this fight. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't remember.
Okay. There is this part where Trevor knees Alucard in the balls, and it has zero effect.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And then Alucard says, "Please, this isn't a bar fight. Have some class."
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I laughed so hard when that happened.
Yeah.
I do have to
Yeah.
say this, there's a lot of funny stuff in the show. It's not all grim and people being ripped apart.
Yeah.
Especially season two. There's a lot of joke cracking in season two. A lot
Cool.
of the joke cracking actually is the it's funny because there's a rivalry between Trevor and Alucard, but they also joke around a lot.
Oh,
And
okay.
most of the jokes are pretty blue. So it's funny. I can't wait till we get to season two. You're gonna love it. But one of my friends who also loves Castlevania as a series, he didn't like the show because he
Oh,
didn't
really?
like. Well, I told him, "Why don't you like it?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't like the jokes that they crack." And I was like, "Well, it's well, you were expecting the show to be like super serious and dramatic." And he's like, "Yeah, that's kind of like because the games themselves, there's no humor really that I could think of in the games.
Oh,
So
okay.
to have like the humor in the series seems a little uncharacteristic of Castlevania, but I think it really works here. I think the
Yeah, I
humor
agree.
just really works for this series. So yeah, that's the thing I forgot to say about the fight. Trevor attempts to knee Alucard in the balls. He does knee him in the balls. It just has he no sells it. Like it has zero effect.
Yeah.
Almost as if he has no balls or his balls are dead or don't have any feeling. I don't know what to say, but anyway, um,
Yeah.
the Mexican standoff happens, and before they were about to take each other out, Sypha threatens the vampire, and he approves of their resolve and then introduces himself as Alucard.
Yeah. So it was
Uh,
like a fight to test him, basically, right?
yes, it was a fight to test him, but also we know now that the sleeping soldier story was a real story,
Mm-hmm.
and
And it's actually it's interesting because it's actually the
a
idea of
pro-
using Dracula's son to kill Dracula.
and the sleeping soldier story is also a prophecy because when they recite parts of the story, the sleeping soldier was supposed to be met by a hunter and a scholar.
Right. Right.
So um, he offers his assistance in defeating Dracula, and he says, "Yes, let's go kill my father." So we didn't really know. Well, if you're me, I already knew it was his father. Like I know the story already. But for those who are introduced to this series, this would be kind of a surprise. You know,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that's his father. Dracula's his dad. I've
Yeah.
known this for
It's pretty
20
cool.
years. Yes. That was his dad. As soon as I saw him come out of the coffin, I knew exactly who he was.
Okay.
It was no surprise to me. I was like, oh shit, that's Alucard.
That makes
Like,
sense.
yeah. So, and I knew who the speaker was. I was like, oh, that's Sypha. That's the other character. There is a fourth character, but sadly, the fourth character I don't believe appears in this series.
Oh, who is it?
The fourth character is named Grant Dynasty. And Grant Dynasty is a pirate who can climb walls, basically, and he's really
That's pretty
agile and he's
cool.
good with knives.
That's pretty cool
So
character.
the season ends with the trio starting their adventure together. Their adventure
Hmm.
to go kill Dracula, because that's what Castlevania is all about. Killing
Hmm.
Dracula. Like pretty much every single,
Yep.
not every single thing. I think most of the games you kill Dracula at the end, but yeah, that's what you do. You kill Dracula.
You kill Dracula in every game?
Every game that I've played, you kill Dracula.
Oh, okay. Does he like get resurrected after each game or something like that?
Yes. Many of the
Okay.
games revolve around cults trying to resurrect Dracula.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of crazy cults out there that want to revive him for some reason or other. And a lot of those games, you fight like some resurrected version of Dracula.
Okay.
But that is the end of season one. It's very short. Starts off with a cliffhanger, or ends with a cliffhanger. And man, I can't wait till we get to season two. That's so
Yeah, me
awesome.
too.
I will tell you, in season two, one of the voice actors is Peter Stormare.
Who's that again? Is he that um
He
the
is a
not
Norwegian
Russian
actor who
who often plays
who
Russian
plays
guys?
often. He often plays Russians, um, or he often plays Russians or Italians. But
Oh, okay.
in season two, he actually plays a Viking, which kind of fits right in with
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
which
He
which
played
is actually accurate.
he played one of the gods in the one of the some of the early episodes in the American God show, right?
Yeah, he was that Russian god who I forgot his name, but I know he had a big ass hammer.
Right.
But yeah, he played one of the gods there. He's been a character actor. I think he's in the Marvel movies. He played like a Russian mob boss and one of the Marvel movies. I
He
forget.
plays the Russian mob boss often.
Yeah, he does. I think that's probably one of his most frequent roles.
Yeah.
Um, he played a significant role in the show Prison Break. I don't know if you're familiar with that TV show.
No, I haven't seen that. I've heard of it.
Yeah, he's one of the people in the prison. He's like an Italian mob boss, if that makes sense. But he
Okay.
does also a lot of voiceover work. I've played dozens and dozens of games where his voice shows up in some form or fashion.
Okay. Okay.
But yes, season one, short. How would you rate the thing?
Hmm. I give it I'd say I give it 4 out of 5 stars. I think it's great.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's a good introduction, but after I watched it, I was like, man, this is way too short. How can a first season have 4 episodes that are like 20 minutes long? This just didn't
Mhm.
feel right to me. I was like kind of
You
mad.
said there are 10 in season 2?
Yeah, 10 episodes.
Cool.
Like all the rest of the seasons have 10 episodes in it.
Okay. Yeah, that sometimes happens with the pilot seasons. They have less episodes to see how popular they'll be, I guess.
Yes, and this ended up being tremendously popular.
Awesome.
Tremendously. Like, I think it was rated number one on Netflix for quite a while.
Oh, cool.
Um, and they got so much hype that I think they ordered season two, like immediately after season one. Got so much love in the nerdosphere. But season two is another day.
Awesome.
Wondering if we should go through the whole thing or just do half of it because it's 10 episodes.
Oh, you mean like do 2 episodes for season 2?
Possibly. Oh shoot, did I not? Oh man, I didn't have it on the right screen.
What?
The stream. That's all right now.
Oh, okay.
What was I saying?
might want to do 2 episodes for season 2.
Possibly, but then again, we got through this in an hour, so
Oh, okay.
yeah, it wasn't. We were. It wasn't that long that we were talking about this, but that is Castlevania Season 1. It's short, it's sweet, it is a great introductory point in the world of Castlevania. Chronologically, it's not the first, because I think there are other Castlevania games that are prequels to even this era.
Oh, okay.
So I think the earliest they go back is like chronologically is the 1200s, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, okay.
And then that
Cool.
first game, actually, the protagonist is a woman, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
But worth checking out. 4 stars. I give it 4 too. I didn't give it too much because I felt that there should have been more in the first season. Yeah, it's a pilot, but come on, it's Castlevania.
You
You
mean
could
more
have.
episodes?
Yeah, there are only 4 episodes, man.
Yeah.
That's way too short.
Yeah.
Um, and I think so that the Lord of Shadows games are before Trevor's time as well. As I think in the Lord of Shadows, you play as the first Belmont, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
In the Lord of Shadows games, those are the more recent 3D games.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, check it out, everybody. Highly recommend it. It was popular for a reason. It's great animation, great, mature, not for kids. Definitely not for kids. Um, but it's good horror stuff. They
Definitely.
did really well with the creatures. I think one of my favorite horror scenes is the church with the bishop, where you
Yeah, that was
have
pretty cool
where
for
he has
sure.
this conversation with the demons, and it's
I
just
like
like,
all the like superpowers that Dracula has. It's pretty cool. Like
mm-hmm,
sending like moving his castle and sending that message with his giant face through the flames and
right,
also all of his cool powers that he has.
mm-hmm. So I was just looking at a timeline really quick for Castlevania. The earliest timeline is 1094 AD. So that's
Okay.
back in the day. Leon Belmont. The first Castlevania game takes place in 1691. That's with Simon Belmont. And part three, Trevor, is 1476. So there it goes. All right. Well, did you want to talk about anything that you read this past couple weeks?
Yeah, sure. Um, I read what was that one called? Oh yeah, Shadow of the Giant, which was the most recent one in the Ender's Shadow series that I read. The one that's kind of like the second Ender's Game series about those kids who were in the battle school with Ender in the first Ender's Games books, and it's about what's happening on Earth while he's gone. And yeah, I thought they were pretty interesting. I still like the original Ender's Game series the most. I like all the like high science fiction concepts that it goes into and how bizarre and strange and complicated and deep it gets.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just a very different type of series like I was talking about before. It's more like geopolitics and war and control, fighting for control of the kids from the battle school, and then they get involved in different armies for fighting for control of the earth. And it's interesting in that way. I just don't like it as much as the original Ender's Game series.
Mm. So it's a good kind of like a diversion from the main series.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting too because like if you read the main series, you see all this cool shit happening, but until I started reading this series, I didn't even really think that much about, oh yeah, what the hell's happening back on Earth while all this has happened? I mean, I know he's exchanging messages with his sister, but that's the only sense we get about it.
Yeah, I guess it's more hardcore sci-fi. The main Ender series, especially with the second books and third and fourth, it's more hardcore sci-fi
Yeah,
versus, you know, the other books which aren't that.
yeah,
Um, yeah, because they get like really heady into some of those sci-fi things, like the virus and all the other crazy stuff that happens.
and like people changing bodies and different alien species interacting with each other.
Yeah, and like this, what is it? What do they call it? The Ansible, and how the Ansible runs off of some type of, I guess the equivalent in real science would be the quantum entanglement.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
It's like some type of quantum entanglement that allows him to communicate with entities and do like this crazy stuff in the last book. That's
yeah.
like, whoa, they are really going out there.
Hmm.
When they start doing like the dimension hopping stuff, I was like, wow, and then creating entities out of thin air. Like they basically, he becomes omnipotent-ish in the end,
Pretty
kind
much.
of.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, like he's able to warp reality and travel anywhere he wants, whenever he wants, and then um, like his inner conscience basically manifests into physical reality as a copy of his brother and a copy of his sister.
yeah. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it gets pretty crazy. Like the sci-fi stuff gets pretty crazy in the last book.
Definitely.
But yeah, I haven't read any of the Shadow books yet. And whenever you're ready, I'll get you the first Formic Wars. I really enjoyed that one. I think you'll like that one a lot. It's like a super
Yeah,
prequel.
cool. Yeah, I definitely want to read that one. Apparently, there are two trilogies. There's the first Formic War trilogy and the second Formic War trilogy.
Yeah, I haven't read. I started the second Formic War, but I think I was reading. I read something else instead.
Okay. Yeah,
But
I bet I can probably read that first one in the first Formic War, like after the one that you just sent me the other day, which is Shadows in Flight, which I haven't read yet.
and that's the last of the Shadow series.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. There's actually another book being worked on that's supposed to come out sometime this year or next year, I believe.
Oh, really? He's working on
Yeah,
another Shadow book?
yeah.
Oh,
Same
because
with
so this stuff
the
is still ongoing then.
Yeah, yeah. Same with the Dune
Okay.
series too, actually, I noticed.
There's
Um,
still stuff in progress?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
Brian Herbert and that guy whose name I forget, who co-authors the other Dune books and the prequel and like during the original Dune series by Frank Herbert. They're apparently still working on other books that are supposed to come out like this year, next year too.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, actually, that's I just started earlier today. Also, I started reading Navigators of Dune, which is that first one in the or no, sorry, the third one in the Schools of Dune series, which is that one. I forget what one of them. Oh yeah, I think the first one is called Sisterhood of Dune, and the second one is called Mentats of Dune, and then this one obviously is Navigators of Dune. And it's interesting. It's still like I think it's still hundreds or perhaps thousands of years in the future, um, after after the Butlerian Jihad series.
Hmm.
That's my favorite of the prequel series. I really like two of the different prequel trilogies, and that's my favorite one. But this takes place a little bit in the future of that, but still 10,000 years before the events of the original Dune books. And like I said, it's how these different schools get formed like the Mentats and the Navigators and the Bene Gesserit schools, and it's like it coincides with the struggles that are still going on after the official end of the Butlerian Jihad. There's still these cults who want to wipe out all technology, and then there are people who want to achieve something in between. And then, of course, as happens in every single Dune book, people are struggling for the power of the Empire.
Yeah, that's Dune for you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you're way, way ahead of me on Dune stuff.
Yeah, I
And
think I've read like 15 or so books, or probably more.
yeah, and you're like, I guess, like we've probably read as like the same amount of Ender's books. You just read different ones than I have.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, it'll be interesting once you get into the Formic Wars.
for
I
sure.
liked those books. I thought they were really entertaining.
For sure. Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading them. Yeah, I also, um, oh yeah, the other day I listened to the audiobook of one of Neil Gaiman's first books that I hadn't read before, called Neverwhere, which was
Hmm.
it was pretty interesting. It's not one of my favorite Neil Gaiman books, but it's still pretty interesting. It's kind of about this guy who finds he's walking somewhere with his fiance, and they find an injured girl on the street, and his fiance is impatient, and she just wants him to leave her and let someone else help her, but she's clearly injured, and she says she doesn't want to go to a hospital, so he takes her back to his apartment. And then, without getting into too much spoilers, it's like he gets involved with this weird fantasy realm, alternate reality with like monsters and demons and angels and stuff, like kind of standard Neil Gaiman type of stuff. So it's definitely pretty interesting and worth reading.
Oh, okay. Huh. Yeah, I wanted to get to that one too. I need to put that one on my list.
Yeah.
But yeah, I sort of find his stuff hit and miss. Like there's some stuff I was like, oh, it's okay, and
Hmm.
some of it's like really good.
Yeah, I
Um,
kind of uh, I kind of agree with you too. They're like I forget what it was called, but oh yeah, Anansi Boys. That one, that's kind of the sort of like sequel slash spin-off to
like an
American Gods.
offshoot.
I didn't
Yeah.
I didn't like that anywhere near as much as American Gods. I thought it was definitely interesting and worth reading too, but I definitely like the original American Gods more too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think it was Stardust that I read. I was like, yeah, this is okay. That's
Yeah, that's kind of one of his YA stories, right? I think I know the general concept, like it's about a gay pirate.
no,
No?
that's a different one.
Maybe they did.
Stardust.
Maybe that's just the movie, because I haven't seen the movie, but my parents have, and apparently Robert De Niro plays the main character, who's a gay pirate.
Yeah, there's no gay pirate that I can remember in the
Okay.
movie. But the book, it's just basically like kind of like a, I don't know, kind of like a fairy tale story, but more adult.
Okay.
Because there's this one point where there's a witch that's like looking for the star that fell out of the sky who turns into a girl. But the witch, I know, comes across somebody and slits their throat, and it's a pretty bloody scene in the book.
Oh, okay.
So it's not really a kid's story.
I wonder if
But
it's just not even based on the Neil Gaiman book, and it's just something totally different.
maybe. I don't know. Is there a witch in the movie? Because that's the
I
main
don't.
antagonist is a
I don't know.
witch.
Like I said, I haven't actually seen the movie.
Mm, okay. But I liked his Norse mythology book. That's really fun.
Yeah, actually, that I really like that one too. I was actually thinking of doing a book chat on that with you and Parker, like maybe after our next book chat, or the one after that.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah,
I liked it. It was short and sweet, and
yeah,
I
really
wasn't
interesting.
super familiar with Norse mythology.
Me neither.
And after reading that, I was like, oh, okay, so this is like the Thor character and the Odin character. These are what these characters are based off of in the Marvel universe. And
Hmm.
I know
It's
that there's,
interesting how they're the ways in which they're different, and the very interesting stories and themes, especially those that you see in other mythologies as well too, like that get replicated in a lot of the fantasy and science fiction series that we read. Though, like this idea of a cycle of time and how there isn't really necessarily beginning and an end to thing. It just repeats in an endless cycle.
yeah, but in the Norse mythology, um, as Neil Gaiman retold it, man, did they do Loki dirty.
Yeah, I know. But they also made him like a little bit more of a nuanced character, I think. Oh, you mean in the movies they did Loki dirty?
No, at the very end of the books,
Oh,
the
okay.
book,
Oh
like,
yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely at the very end. But
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
like,
like in general, in the book, it seemed like he's a little bit more of a nuanced character than he is in the Marvel movies because he's kind of more of a bad guy in the movies. Like in the Norse mythology book, he's definitely a trickster. I forget what the line is, but there's a Thor line at one point where he says something like, "When something bad happens, I'll ask Loki if he did it, and if he didn't, I'll ask how he can help me get me out of it because he's so crafty with his skills, but he doesn't necessarily always use them for bad. Sometimes he uses them to help his brother and stuff too."
oh yeah, you see that in the Marvel universe too. Like at the very end,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
he's an ally, you know,
yeah,
because they are. It is his brother, you know. They're bound by blood, so it can't be. And even in the Marvel universe, when they're pitting each other against each other, it's not. It doesn't seem like it's. I don't know. It seems more like a rivalry than them trying to absolutely destroy each other.
yeah. You could say that. Yeah, especially in some of the movies,
Yeah,
some more than others.
yeah. That's for sure. Um, did you
Yeah.
have any other
Um,
things that you read?
yeah. I also yesterday I read one of Carl Jung's most famous books called the what's it called? Oh yeah, Psychological Types, or the Psychology of Individuation, which I thought was pretty interesting. It He kind of examines a lot of philosophical and religious ideas of different philosophers and other intellectuals like that, and kind of integrates them into. It's not like people got mad at me on Twitter for saying this, but it's really scientific. He says in the book, I something like, I ignore all the data that was available at the time. I'm using my anecdotes from personal experience treating patients and talking to regular people. And then he adds that to his analysis of various intellectual ideas. So I
Hmm.
said that it's philosophy, and that's not meant to be an insult. I think that philosophy is more interesting than science in a lot of ways. And even though
Hmm.
he says some stuff about personality types of people that I think is inaccurate, the place where it comes from, even when he's wrong, is very interesting. So
Hmm.
I understand why people like his work. I think I only read like one or two of his other books, and this is definitely his most like the most like in the one that's kind of the most encompassing of his thoughts and his worldviews.
Oh, okay. And that's Jung. So this is like the Peterson is idol.
Yeah, he doesn't really explain Carl Jung's ideas as well as Carl Jung does himself, though.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Um, all right. Did you
Yeah,
have any others?
yeah. I'm also, um, well, it wasn't a book, but I read the whole Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry for Husserl and phenomenology,
Hmm.
because pretty soon, probably sometime in the next few weeks, I'm going to do another podcast with that guy Peter Salmon, who's the author of a biography about Derrida, and we talked before about Derrida and postmodernism and Jordan Peterson and the IDW and all that kind of stuff. And one of his favorite philosophers is Husserl, and he thinks that he has some very interesting thoughts on phenomenology. So we're going to do another philosophy deep dive conversation about that. So that should be interesting. And then also I'm reading the second book in the Star Wars Thrawn trilogy. I think it's called Dark Force Rising. Like the first book, I think it's interesting. It's so far it's a worthwhile series to read because the trilogy is basically a sequel to the original Star Wars trilogy movies, but it's like a direct sequel with the original characters like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. And in this one, Princess Leia is carrying the two twins of Han Solo, and they're fighting other forces of the Empire that are not refusing to stop fighting, basically. And there's like one other Sith Lord and another like a few other Last Jedi Masters, apparently. So it's pretty interesting. It's not fantastic or super well written or like an amazingly compelling plot, but it's interesting and worth reading if you want to get some more Star Wars lore.
Yeah, I've always been meaning to get into like some of the Star Wars material outside of the movies. That sounds like it would be a good place to start.
There are tons of books too.
Yeah, that's the reason why I have such a difficult time starting any of that, is because there's so much of it.
I know, like every time I'm looking at reading a new book, I think, oh, this looks cool. Oh, this is a whole series too? Jeez.
Yeah, so that's the Star Wars can't, like, I know it's not canon anymore, but all of the Star Wars stories outside of the movies, I always saw intimidating and overwhelming. Like, I just wouldn't know where to start. It's like, man, there's so much stuff. Where
There
are you
are
supposed
so
to
many
start
that
at?
you can even start chronologically. Chronologically, some of the books take place during, I think some of them even take place before the Old Republic, like 30 or 40,000 years before the main
Jesus.
events of the original movies, and then they go way beyond into the future too.
Oh wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's pretty crazy.
yeah.
30,000 years, man. Yeah, I'll start somewhere. I think, yeah, I just gotta motivate myself.
I think the first ones that I read, I've only read like maybe half a dozen so far. I think the first trilogy that I read was the one set in the Old Republic universe, because I remember I really loved those RPG games when I played them when I was a teenager.
Yeah, those are great games. Um, been meaning to play one. Like, it's just so hard to revisit those because of the time sink that they
Yeah,
require.
exactly. Yeah.
But I don't know, maybe I'll just watch someone quickly play through it on YouTube or something.
Oh, yeah.
I guess the only problem is that those games like subject you to so many decisions that affect the plot that it would be hard to watch someone play because you don't get to make those decisions.
Yeah, yeah, I bet.
But yeah, it is what it is. Oh
So
man.
people do like RPG walkthroughs on YouTube and Twitch.
Yeah, just about any freaking game, someone will play
Oh,
through the
okay.
entire thing. I'm
Oh,
pretty
okay.
sure there's probably a video somewhere of someone playing through the entire RPG.
Okay. Cool.
But yeah.
Um,
Oh,
so yeah, that's all. I think that's all I read this past week. All that I can recall.
okay. Well, I didn't read much. I did finish two books recently. Um, I've been investigating CRT.
Yeah, you told me about that.
Um, because where I live, there's a school district that's gone viral, I guess, across the country because there's like some crazy school board meeting and the fight broke out.
Holy shit.
And they were basically protesting that they were teaching CRT in school. And I was a bit skeptical of what they were actually teaching. I was also skeptical about if CRT in itself is because CRT is like an extremely huge boogeyman on the right.
Mm. Sometimes,
Like,
sometimes like there's even like to at the extreme, they just kind of like use critical race theory to mean just wokeness and everything involved with that too, like gender and BLM and all that other stuff.
yeah, and I know Trump had like a CRT ban initiated or whatever,
Hmm.
but yeah, I wanted to investigate it to see why right wingers are so afraid. Really, to be honest, it's not that big of a deal. I read a book called Introduction to Critical Race Theory, and it was written by two of the co-founders of CRT, and it's a basic introduction through what it is. I understand its function. There's some good things and some bad things about it, obviously, but the things I hear from right-wing media about CRT, some of it is just patently false.
Yeah,
I
that's not
was,
surprising.
I understand though where they get some of it from, but it's not contained within the theory. It's when people go too far with shit, um, like Robin DiAngelo. That's just basically going too far with shit. In the
Yeah.
introduction to CRT, there's nothing about shaming white people or like there's even critiques about the Robin DiAngelo. The interesting thing about this introduction to CRT, it does the due diligence to attempt to critique itself.
Okay.
So it does critique itself and it does find flaws in its own philosophy or, whatever you want to call it. But is it teach you to hate America? No. I found zero of that in CRT, at least the introduction to it.
That's
Does it?
probably like that. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if that's like teachers who take these ideas and then don't know what the fuck they're talking about and take it to extremes, which is why
Possibly.
partially, but that's kind of what happened with so-called postmodernism.
Right. One interesting thing, though, in this book is they do reference Foucault and Lyotard. They don't really reference him much. Just like they talk, literally, they mention his name once in the book. It's not like, oh, everything is based off of Foucault and blah 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 blah
Yeah, yeah.
blah.
Critical
There
race
is,
theory was coined by Foucault.
yeah, they do say that there is an influence from postmodernism, and that makes sense because CRT is really based off of being skeptical of meta narratives. Like
Yeah,
that's definitely part of CRT. One of the narratives that they're skeptical of is color blindness. One of the things about color blindness is that color blindness is your most ideal version of a post-racial society. It's like the highest ideal is to have a society that's colorblind. One of
yeah.
the problems is that we're not there yet. So you can't simply. use it as if we've achieved color blindness, if that makes sense. Like, because if I think one of the other reasons too is like if color blindness is the way of operating, then you can write off any type of racial discrimination that's subtle enough not to be explained. I think one of the things that they talk about, because whenever you're, okay, like whenever someone describes a racial disparity, right? We're talking
Mm-hmm.
about Thomas Sowell or anybody else. There's always
Anybody like
someone
that, you
willing,
mean?
yeah, there's always someone willing to explain away the disparity um, as something not to do with race. Yes, that can be the case where it's not really racial related fundamentally. But after reading some of this stuff, there's no way in hell that it can't. There's some disparities that cannot be attributed to anything but race. There is
Oh,
one, yeah, there's one study, and listen to this. This is pretty nuts. Airbnb. Someone did a social experiment with Airbnb because there were, minorities that were complaining that they were having difficulty booking Airbnbs. So what some social scientists did was they created two profiles that were almost literally identical, except the races of the profiles were different. And they found that when they were booking, that the black profile was had a rejection rate because of 16% higher than the white profile. So that means when you rent out an Airbnb, you have the ability to reject the one petitioning to stay at your place.
mm-hmm.
They found out that the black profile got um, 16% more rejections than the white profile. And they were literally identical except for the color of the skin of the people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's nothing else to account for this because they would literally, what the black profile would petition Airbnb and they would say, oh, that's already booked. And then after that, a white profile would go and petition the same Airbnb and they would book it for that white profile. This is after the black profile was rejected.
Okay.
So if the shit still exists, there's still bias. It's
Of course.
people make decisions based and discriminate, on skin color. It's not. It's subtle, but it's still there. It's
Yeah.
subtle enough that people know that something's going on. And there's like a bunch of other social experiments that are pretty much along the same lines as that, like doing blind interviews versus blind resumes versus resumes that indicate that you might be a minority and what the discrepancies are with that. And there's definitely are some. So,
I've heard conflicting studies about that, but I don't really remember. I don't really remember the specific details. Um,
well, the
yeah, that.
Airbnb one is kind of damning. It's
Yeah.
it's
But, well,
there's not.
I think it's like the problem is that people focus on one factor too much depending on their political ideology. Like of course there's still racism and discrimination, but it's like it's not the only thing that should be focused on. And in the but then also, like, it sounds like at least the people who wrote this book, other than people who get way too carried away with the ideas, like they probably wouldn't necessarily say that all disparities are due to racism in the same way that, you know, someone like, well, in the opposite way, kind of, about how, you know, someone like Thomas Sowell or Glenn Lowry would say that it's much more due to culture than racial disparities, but they wouldn't say that there's no racism. I think it's like I think it's more complex than that. Like, obviously culture is a factor, race is a factor, class is a factor, and there are all sorts of other factors too. And then it's going to vary depending on the person, depending on where they live, depending on their income, depending on their race, depending on their culture, and all of these sorts of other things.
Yeah. So there are like some major tenets to CRT. I think one of the major tenets is that racism is not aberrational, it's normal.
Yeah,
I think there's actually a lot of merit in that. Like, I personally believe that everyone is racist to some degree. Um,
I just think that I think there's a difference between racism and discrimination. Like, people,
well, yeah, I think
like,
racially, people
discrimination,
racially discriminate all the time.
yeah, like there's a like discrimination itself is not necessarily inherently bad. Like, I want to date this woman instead of this woman because she looks more attractive on this dating profile or something like that. It doesn't mean I'm like, I don't know, like fat phobiast if one of them is a fat chick or something like that, or you know, like like that kind of thing, I guess, or like discriminate between choosing what type of shoes I want to wear on a particular day or something like that. But if it gets into like racism, obviously that's like discrimination with malice behind your intent. Like, I hate this person because of their skin color. That's when discrimination gets bad.
Yeah, I understand that. In CRT, though, um, when they talk about racism, racism in their world doesn't necessarily have to have malicious intent. So there's a basic disconnect between, like, here's the disconnect. When your average, like, goody two shoes, you know, white person thinks of the word racist or being called that word or anything, they think of the most absolute evil version of what a racist might be, right? Um, in CRT, racist doesn't have to have a malicious intent at all.
I think that's a
It's
big problem, though, because that's like like you just said, it's a totally different way to see it from the way, like, especially people on the other side of the political spectrum see it, which is just like a cause for unnecessary animosity, especially because people often, like, who are looking at that word racism this way often don't explain that that's what they mean when they're arguing with people who have the opposite ideology.
Yeah, I know that. One of the things about CRT is that they're really upfront with that in the book, at least. When they talk about racism, it's not just, oh, the evil white supremacist. That's not what they mean. Uh, they're just talking, like, even just the slightest discrimination is racism for them. And for me, I think I've always believed that everybody is racist to some certain degree, some more than others. Like, you could be like a 99% racist or 1%. I don't think it's completely racial discrimination for me isn't escapable, I don't think. I think you're always going to have some type of racially discriminatory nature. It just depends how much of it you have.
I
Because it's
think the
not
like
like
the
racism is measurable. It's just,
Yeah, yeah.
To me, it's a spectrum. Like, so calling someone a racist to me is kind of dumb. Because when you call someone a racist, you're like, okay, so a racist to what degree? Like, because I defined it differently than everybody else. Oh, that's a racist. It's like, yeah, yeah, there's a lot of racist things, but
Hmm.
okay. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Like in terms of that, I would say that at least it seems like most people kind of like prefer, well, not well, yeah, I guess like tend to associate with people of their own race because it's like you look like me, so maybe this means I have something in common with you, even though that doesn't actually make any sense. Or maybe most people prefer dating people of their own race or something. I mean, I don't know.
yeah, one of the things that I like about CRT is that it recognizes that racism, or at least the racial discriminatory dynamics, is an extremely complex system. So they treat it like a complex system. Um, and that's, I believe, is a good thing. I think that's kind of where the postmodernism comes in. Like when you talk about the exchange of power, that even those who are weak still have power relations within those who are around them. I think it's
That's
kind
actually a
of,
correct way of looking at what Foucault says about power relations. That's good.
yeah, so it's basically that's kind of how they see racism. It's in a very similar way. And in this book, I heard nothing about power plus privilege.
Oh, that's
That
good.
was not mentioned at all. There was no mention that white black people can't be racist. There's
That's
no
good.
mention of that. I don't know
That's
where that
good.
idea comes from, so it didn't come from this book. One of the things I also learned is that CRT is fundamentally paired with legal theories. So it was
Yeah, I heard about
implemented
that.
for,
I heard about that. Yeah.
yeah, so a large part of it revolves around civil legal rights and how to argue cases using these theories.
Right.
Um, so CRT is fundamentally about how to apply things in a law scenario, or how to argue a discrimination case. How do
So,
you,
like, when people like with like diversity training at corporations
that
or shit
shit
like
has
that.
nothing to do with CRT as far as
Okay, I was
I've
gonna
read.
ask. I was gonna ask. Is that not critical race theory, or is it people who misunderstood criminal race theory and then took it way too far?
CRT is basically like postmodernism. It's a tool, an observational tool. It's not, it's an observational tool. However, it's a tool that activists use.
Yeah,
So it really depends on the activist
that can
who
that can
uses
get
it.
super confusing and difficult too.
Yeah, because a lot of
Because people that
CRT,
I can see how that can lead to people assuming that it's intended to be like weaponized, even if the original authors themselves explicitly did not say that, because all of these activists use it that way. So that that
yeah,
that makes sense. That makes sense to me. That it wouldn't say that in like your original textbooks by people who invented this for its original purpose of legal theory. I can understand how that happens because, like you were saying, that's exactly the same sort of thing that happened with postmodernism as well.
yeah. So I obviously see how this could get out of hand. I don't think it's at any fault of CRT itself. It's just whenever you give a tool to someone, they can always use that tool nefariously, no matter what that tool is. Like you can use a hammer to build a house, or you can use a hammer to smash someone's face in. You
Yeah,
know?
I always use that Joe Rogan quote on one of the documentaries about legalizing drugs that he was in that I saw. He said, "You can use a hammer to build a house, or you can hit yourself in the dick with it."
Yeah. So it's kind of one of those deals because I was expecting to like be outraged, but the problem with CRT is that if you're not a person who approaches topics with nuance, this is not the thing for you. It's just you
Yeah,
won't fucking understand it.
it doesn't seem like a lot of
Unfortunately.
activists, especially activists that are reported on in the news and social media, have much nuance in their views.
Yeah, so I have my own critiques of the CRT. I think one of the things in the book that they said that CRT is trying to do, which I am opposed to, and in CRT, one of the things they want to do is regulate hate speech. And I don't think that's a good idea. However, there are certain situations where hate speech is already regulated.
Hmm.
Like if you're in the workplace and somebody calls you some slur, you can actually file civil suits for discrimination. What if some random person on the street just calls you a slur? You can't do anything about it. That's fine. You're not first to interact with that person.
Yeah,
Um, it's different when you're in a workplace, though.
especially if it's
Is
your boss or someone like that.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's I understand it for those types of purposes, but to totally regulate hate speech, I don't think that's a good idea. That's
Yeah,
something that they want to do in CRT. But
yeah, I don't
yeah,
like
I
that
didn't
idea either.
yeah, I didn't yeah, I disagree, but one of the other problems I have is everybody looks at a philosophy, a school of thought, and immediately they think of the most fundamentalist version of that philosophy or school of thought.
Man,
And
that's why it's so useful to look at like different people's ideologies. Like it's so useful to, because like left wingers have some of the best criticisms and point are good at pointing out strawmans of right wingers, and then right wingers have some of the best criticisms of left wingers and point out some of their strawmans, even though both of them make strawmans of each other's arguments.
right. So, yeah, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to listen to this book and basically be as pissed off as listening to Candace Owens or Robin DiAngelo, but it wasn't like that at all. It's mostly all legal theories to aid in civil rights cases. So this is why I'm not understanding. Oh, we're gonna teach CRT in schools. I was like, huh? Like, what exactly do you mean by teach CRT in schools? So it sounds like what people are complaining about, whatever they're teaching in schools, doesn't sound like it's CRT, and I have no idea what the fuck it is.
Like
But, cause,
wokeness.
well, wokeness, CRT isn't wokeness, it's just observation.
No, I mean, is that what's being taught in schools?
I don't
That,
know. I
yeah,
have no fucking clue.
yeah.
I know it's not being taught at my wife's school, and I don't know what they mean by like the criticisms that I hear mostly from the right is like, oh, they're teaching our kids to hate America.
I don't think
It's like
that's
I
happening
don't.
really.
Yeah, it's like I read this book has fucking nothing to do with that at all. And then they're like, oh, don't teach them CRT. They're gonna teach you that white people are evil. Again, not in this book. Um,
Yeah, I think that like the maybe the version that people are talking about is like some
The
of what
Robin
some of
DiAngelo version of
yeah,
game.
exactly. Well, like she's like running running racial sensitivity training and all that kind of shit. And like to say maybe it's like similar to what I've told you before about what was being taught in my local college when I went back there a few years ago in my quote unquote sociology class, in which every day we talked about how black people can't be racist, and kids should not be allowed to be assigned gender. There should be an authoritarian policy against it, and we should always endlessly talk about racism and feminism every single class.
Yeah, well, in the book they do discuss um, like intersectionality and shit like that, but I know intersectionality is one of those other things you have to take with nuance because what it does is it explains a complex system of interaction, much like Foucault's theory on power. Um, like your identity is not something that's very simple.
Of
There's so
course.
many parts of your identity, and that's kind of what makes your experience unique. That's basically what intersectionality is. It's about
See,
the
that's where the
uniqueness. Go
sorry.
ahead.
That's like the opposite of Foucault. He was he didn't explicitly say so, but like in most of his books, especially the history of sexuality, he's very harshly criticizing the very idea of identity and putting people into these endless different categories.
Right, right. I think they're trying to use the complexity of his power theory and they're trying to apply it to identity.
Right.
Um, and basically how those things intersect. That's pretty much all it is. It doesn't really, it's just another tool of observation, pretty much. Like, I don't know. I wish I was able to get you this book, but I got it on Audible. I spent the credit on it because I
Okay.
really wanted to. Because this whole CRT debate thing has really been heating up in my area.
Okay.
I was like, you know what? If I want to talk about this intelligently, I should at least know it or at least be introduced to it before I start saying shit that's super ignorant, you
Yeah.
know? Which is like most people that haven't read Foucault. You know what I mean.
I
You've
do.
had to deal with it.
Endlessly.
Yeah,
Endlessly.
yeah. So now that I'm thinking um, about cynical theories,
Oh, they're
yes,
so wrong. They're so wrong. So
yeah.
awful.
So the problem with cynical theories is that they're doing kind of the same thing that the right wing is doing, where they're taking like the most fundamentalist and extreme versions of these schools of thoughts and um, saying, "Oh, look at this is postmodernism," blah blah blah
Yeah.
blah blah. I will say that some of the ideas from postmodernism are used, but it's not postmodernism.
No.
It's something else. It's something unique. But
Yeah.
yes, CRT is not that big of a deal, dude. It's like I was looking for the right wing criticisms through this. It's like, what are these motherfuckers talking about? There's no preaching of hatred of America or hatred of white people. I think the problem is that I think just in general, conservatives are very uncomfortable talking about race in
Yeah.
general. So whenever that word comes up, it just it just puts them on the defensive immediately, you know.
Yeah. Man,
And
like I should send you I watched this podcast yesterday on the Wide Crack channel I follow, who they talk about philosophy and different movies and TV shows, and
Right.
they also have this series where they called Culture Binge, where they talk about different cultural issues, and they're clearly all like really lefty about it.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But they were. I was impressed because the guy who's the main guy named Michael, I think, who's an actual philosopher, like actually has a doctorate in philosophy or something like that. He was
Mm-hmm.
actually properly explaining postmodernism and Foucault and stuff like that. And then
Really?
he was explaining basically critical race theory, kind of this in very similar way as the way you were explaining it. So
Yeah.
I should send you that link. It wasn't their whole discussion. It was just one part of it. I don't remember when it
Dude,
happens, but I should send it
send
to you.
that. Yeah, send that to
Yeah,
me. I want
yeah,
to listen to that.
yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah, it ends up
I
what
told you.
happened.
Did I tell you about how like I couldn't even get through it in this video that I just mentioned? Um, that philosopher Michael, he mentions the video that I told you about a while ago that I tried to watch but couldn't even fucking get through. It's like this 4 hour thing where James Lindsay is going all into detail about how Hegel is woke, and he was like behind all this postmodernism and critical race theory shit, and he was like super woke and shit. Like, he doesn't have anything to fucking do with all that shit, man. He was talking about ideas and these weird, complex philosophical ideas like continental philosophers do.
Who posted it?
James Lindsay has a chat, like I think he did it a few weeks ago or something like that. It's got like some highfalutin title like Hegel's dialectic. Like he talks about how Hegel's dialectic is an example of wokeness. That's just like Hegel's dialectic. It's just thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So you're looking at two sides of an argument and trying to synthesize them into an argument that makes sense. This is a base, like we were just talking about with postmodernism and critical race theory. This is a tool. There's nothing, absolutely nothing whatsoever inherently political about it. It has nothing to do with wokeness. People have been using the dialectic since ancient Greek philosophy. It's
Yeah.
so fucking stupid.
Yeah. So there are some flaws with CRT. Like I said before, like they want hate speech regulation. Another semi flaw is that they actually I don't even know how to explain this, but they say that narrative and story is extremely important, and that's obvious, especially when you're in a courtroom, because
Yeah.
it's all about telling the right story to the jurors to decide in your favor. So these are legal theories, right? So one of their things is that they focus on story and narrative to tell um, CRT, which totally makes sense within the legal framework,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what you do in court.
Yeah, you're
Um,
trying to make convincing arguments.
yeah, you're not scientists. So one of the things I often see as a critique to this is that, oh, they're using postmodernism because the story and is more is more effective than facts and blah 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 blah. And then I was like, yeah, that's typically true in a courtroom. Like you can have all the facts in the world, but if your story sucks, it doesn't matter what the fuck. If your story sucks, then those facts aren't going to come across great to winning your case.
Yeah, exactly.
People, so when I hear this in CRT, if you expand it with beyond the courtroom, I think that's where you got problems, you know. But then again, hey, all everything is all about narrative and story. That's kind of what I learned from mixed martial arts, or from Hunter at least, how important narratives and stories are. And that's like a very postmodern thing, to focus on the narrative and story rather than the facts. It's just human, you know. Uh, I guess the synthesis would be able to combine both of those together in a real effective way in order to win arguments. And when we're talking about CRT and winning arguments, we're talking about winning arguments in court or for the sake of civil rights. So,
Right.
yeah, CRT stuff is, I was like, dude, these white ringers are just so out of touch with what this actual shit is. I don't know. They might be complaining about something else that they're calling CRT. I don't know what that is. I don't have any personal experience of teachers trying to teach their kids to hate America. Um, and I guess you have the experience of having an SJW teacher.
Yeah.
But
Even she didn't say like hey, you should hate America or something, or like there was a lot of criticism of, like colonialism and North America, and how we have a history of oppressing other countries and minorities and stuff like that. So maybe they
that's
mean like
probably what
this
white
is
ring.
going to
That's what they
make people
mean.
hate America.
I think that's what they mean. Like, but I think we should be more accurate with our history.
Yeah,
We need to teach the good shit and the bad shit. Like, you have to do
obviously.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, and this is like, you can't like hate America. I understand the thing about conservatism. They're very big on patriotism and whatnot. But man, you should know your history, you know? So, CRT, yeah, that's on the book. The other book that I read that's very much along the same lines that I just finished recently is called Biased. And it's a very nuanced look at like bias when it comes to racial, gender, religious bias. Basically, all of the biases you could think of that are related to, um, race, gender, age. You think of it. Um, so it's a book about a woman who was a police trainer, and there's a lot of good anecdotes about like the biases of policing and things like that. One of the interesting things that I loved about the book is that she took a really nuanced approach to bias, and she actually pretty much, without naming names, critiqued corporate bias training.
oh,
As
interesting.
yeah, she said that it's not. Um, there's nothing that says that bias training is at all effective.
Yeah, I've heard that.
She also says that oftentimes corporations will use bias training to shield themselves against further criticisms of other wrongdoings.
Yeah, kind of
So they,
reminds me of like what I've seen progressives pointing out about corporations going all woke virtue signaling, but then not actually doing anything at all to help these oppressed people who they apparently care about, and still doing things like incorporating child labor into making their products and shit like that.
right. So that's one of the critiques that she levied is that this corporate implicit bias training is just kind of used as a shield for corporations to not have to really do much. Because if the bias training really doesn't work, then really they're not doing much.
Yeah.
So she examines like Charlottesville, and there's like some other anecdotes about her life and some other things. I thought it was pretty good. Like it wasn't. It's like whenever I read these books, I'm expecting like a D'Angelo esque type of experience,
Yeah.
just based off of some of these titles. Like when I was going to read CRT, I was like, okay, what kind of bullshit am I getting into here? Same thing with this book, but no, they actually are really, really nuanced about what they're talking about. I actually highly recommend this Bias book. One of the other things I wanted to note is that because the introduction to CRT is actually a textbook, I read third edition, so that's the most up to date as far as I'm concerned. One of the interesting things of that book is they actually reference the new Jim Crow. I didn't know that the new Jim Crow was related, but it's actually, now that I think about it, new Jim Crow is CRT in essence.
Okay.
Because she's a lawyer.
Yeah.
um,
That book is certainly an example of what you were talking about how the title makes it sound like white fragility, but the content is really not that way at all.
yeah, so yeah, it's nothing like D'Angelo. I would understand, like, if you read White Fragility, and then I understand the critique there. One of the biggest critiques is that it just seems overly hostile. Um, but that's what it is. It's antagonistic, and then throughout the whole book, she's like, "Oh yeah, people walk out of my seminars." I was like, "Yeah, of course." But yeah, the two books they were pretty good. I think I gave the CRT book 3 stars. Like it wasn't amazing, but it wasn't horrible. It was just kind of an informative textbook if you want to know what that stuff is. Biased, I gave 4 stars because it's a more personalized look at bias. Plus, there's like a lot of anecdotes and stories mixed with like studies and other things that show different types of biases. Like it's not all black versus white. They do all types of examinations, like even white stuff that happens with her. Like the opening story is her attendance to an all white school, and she kind of flips it on its head by showing that since she was biased against white people, she always assumed that they were up to the worst when they were kind of like talking amongst themselves. She thought they were talking about her. And there was like this one instance where she saw, white people looking at her at her school and talking about her under their breaths or whatever. But what was going on is they were planning a surprise party for her. But since she had like this
Oh,
anti-white
wow.
bias at the time, she thought that they were like plotting against her. So it's not all about, oh, we gotta hate white people. That's not what that book's about.
Okay.
That's not what any of those two books are about.
Yeah, that doesn't sound that way at all. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's great.
so I do see like the connection of postmodernism to CRT, but the way that they connect it in cynical theories is like beyond ridiculous.
Yeah, no shit.
Um,
Sounds like even what they say about critical race theory is beyond ridiculous.
well, yeah, there's critiques, like I said, wanting to ban hate speech,
Yeah,
at
that's
least regulate it.
yeah,
Using it outside of the legal setting seems mm, doesn't it seems out of place.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Um, because I was reading, because I was talking about CRT on MMA, mixed martial arts, and some people were like pulling quotes from the very book I was reading out of context. And I was like, did you read this? Did you actually read this book? Because I'm halfway through it. And if you're going to critique these things and you haven't read the material, I'd kind of advise against it. you know?
Geez, that's
Um,
another thing that happens with so-called postmodernism all the fucking time. Have you read any books by Foucault or Derrida? No, but James Lindsay and Jordan Peterson said all this shit. Oh, well, have they read them? Oh, no, they haven't either, have they?
yeah, it's I wanted to be informed. That's all. I know there's like everything I hear about anti-wokeness nowadays revolves around CRT
Hmm.
as like the linchpin of wokeness, and then I'm examining CRT, and it's like, okay, like CRT, yeah, I could see how it could be weaponized, but in its essence, it's not really a weapon. It's just a way to look at things or to observe phenomena. It's basically a framework to observe phenomena. And
Okay.
yeah, some people are use it for bullshit. Like that's what happens. Like some
Like
people get
according
really
to critical
crazy and
race theory,
fundamentalist
we
with
should
things.
do racial bias training at corporations now.
Yeah, like those the two books that I read both critique racial bias training or implicit bias training. And the book that I read was entirely about implicit bias. I was like, wow, yeah, they're both saying that the Rob and D'Angelo method is complete BS. Not only is it complete BS, it only allows the the corporations that employ it to run things as they had before. The only thing that's different is they had this implicit bias training as if it did anything. It's like, okay. And then the only thing that Robin DiAngelo really does is antagonize white people. And most of the, I think, attendees to these things are white people. So I don't know. But they did talk about whiteness studies, though. I did find out a little bit about what whiteness is. It's not, I don't know, when people hear these terms, they just fucking freak out. Um, all whiteness studies is the study of whiteness. I know it sounds a little, how do I explain it? What is,
That's like
so,
blackness studies. Like
yeah, basically.
there is no blackness, and I don't think there is
There is,
any
well,
whiteness
there is.
either.
There's a African American study, so there
No,
are.
I mean I don't believe I'm not saying that people don't study this. I mean I don't believe that these are actual real things to study.
Well, you would think so, just like CRT isn't a real thing. Um, I would have to investigate what this whiteness
Like
stuff is, but from what I've read so far, whiteness just basically another name for the race who is currently in power. They just so happen to be white.
any
So,
race that does that mean that any race that's currently in power is called white or has an essence of whiteness or
well, because I think they encapsulate colonialism. Wait, actually, you know what? Here's one of the things I thought was really constructive. And I was like, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. Um, Whiteness studies is all about the categorization of being white and what that was throughout history.
okay.
And I think actually even someone like Thaddeus Russell would agree. So the definition of what and who is white has changed
That's true.
throughout
Yeah.
history. That's
Yeah,
something
that's
that they
true.
cover in whiteness studies, how Jews, the Irish, and Italians used to be considered non-white.
Yeah, they
Um,
were literally referred to by the N-word.
yeah, so that's actually part of whiteness studies, like the history of white categorization. That's what they covered in the CRT book, at least. I don't know if it goes beyond that and how far. I'm pretty sure there are people that take it too far, but um, from what they talked about in the CRT book, that's basically what it was. Like what about that categorization and what that meant throughout history.
That should be called race studies. because it's like
Well, but it's only
it's kind of
it
like
is.
showing like kind of what Thaddeus Russell shows in his book, that there isn't like a white there isn't a whiteness that all people can be classified into, that's going to change, that's this like eternal definition of a white person, in the same way that you could say that about any race of people, like Jews or Italians or Irish people, or any type of people, or any of the various different types of African or Asian or Indian people, or anything like that.
Well, from what I've read in this book, at least, the whiteness studies is completely American centric.
Okay.
So I don't think it really applies outside of the United States. So when they're saying like whiteness, we're talking about like the categorization as well as those who fought to be included in that categorization. So they talk about how Mexicans are now in the have a new category, and how there's like not a white Hispanic. That's basically like the categorization of what encapsulates white at what period in time. But yeah, when I first heard whiteness studies, it just sounded super ridiculous to me. There are probably parts that are ridiculous, but that is useful, like how the category white has changed over time and what has been considered white throughout history.
Mm-hmm. I just
So,
remember I read like this academic paper on whiteness studies that someone posted on Mixed Mental Arts a long time ago, and it basically went into that Robin DiAngelo shit about how uh, white people don't like whiteness studies because it makes them uncomfortable about their race. And I was like, oh really? You know how all white people feel, hey? Would you say that about all black people? All black people feel this way. That makes sense.
yeah, I don't. Well, I don't know. Who knows? I'm pretty sure there's some stuff that will make black people uncomfortable about black people,
Of course. Yeah.
the fact that the the ones who captured the slaves that sold them into slavery were other black people for the most
Mm-hmm.
part. Um,
Well, and like most of human history, everyone made everyone their slaves.
right. So, uh, like it's. I think the problem is that people try to see. You can try to objectively and approach topics with nuance, and then there are people that just take things too far. And
Yeah, of course.
and that's basically, I guess that's the straw manning, right? So you're trying to battle against the most extreme version of X, Y, and Z when the moderate and normal version of that is pretty moderate,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever that version of that is something else entirely,
Yeah.
like postmodernism, uh, trying to, people saying, oh, you're a relativist. I think I showed you that David Pagman video. It's like, oh yeah, postmodernists, they don't believe in objective reality. It's like, yeah, and then I actually wrote a comment on that video, and oh no, he said that postmodernists think reality is a social construction. I was like, and I wrote a comment, yeah, I'm pretty sure postmodernists think the moon is socially constructed. That makes a whole lot of sense. That's
He
a,
probably doesn't even say what social social construction means. Like social construction, people always think that they use it as like they use it as a pejorative, but like this similarly to what we've other concepts that we've been talking about, it just means that these are concepts that people socially constructed based on whatever relevant characteristics there are. Like I've said many times before about how in Thomas Sowell's book, the like libertarian or right-leaning economist, he says in his book called Intellectuals and Race, he defines race is a social, or he defines race as a social construction based on biological characteristics. So even he acknowledges that this is what a social construct actually is. Even if you say reality is a social construct, it doesn't mean what we think of reality is all in our heads and we don't really actually have any idea what's going on whatsoever. That's not really what it actually means.
Yeah, it's just people who don't really know what they're talking about. Like whenever someone says postmodernism, my ears just kind of perk up because I know they're going to say something really stupid, or if they don't say anything stupid, I'll rub my chin and be like, they get it.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, and unfortunately, like even a lot of the political commentators that I like often use that wrong or incorrectly.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, because we
Like
follow a
all
lot
of
of the
them
same
that I
people.
like don't get it right. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you should just not talk about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was like that's why I sent that Pac-Man video to you, mostly because he starts talking about postmodernism.
Oh, okay.
Um, but he also, here's another big critique that I have, is he says it's reductionist. It's actually the opposite. It makes everything overly complicated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it gets very complex very easily. It's not. And I also said in my comment, when he said, I put the comment on the video. I was like, yeah, postmodernists don't believe that the moon is socially constructed.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
would
You
be,
said that.
and then I said that would be reductionists in thinking that
Yeah.
postmodernism is that way. So he used his own argument against them, but whatever. So yeah, and then I've been reading the last Harry Potter book. I barely started it. Barely started it, so I'm not very far in it at all.
That's Deathly Hallows.
Deathly Hallows, yes. And I started listening to more of The Path of Daggers because we're going to probably be talking about that soon.
Yeah, were we gonna do the next episode on that next week with Tristram?
Yeah, I'm going to ask him to see if he can do that. But yeah, I wanted to get into some more Wheel of Time since we haven't talked about it in a while, and I'm already reading into the next sections. But this one is a bit shorter than the other books, but yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, that was my investigations into, I guess, woke culture. But there wasn't really anything that woke when I really looked at it. It's like, yeah, there's some stuff that I don't agree with, but I didn't see the power plus privilege thing in there. I didn't see a general hatred for white people. I didn't see anything about hating America. But I guess not white people, but conservatives just get really angry when you criticize certain things about America's past. I don't know what it is.
Or at least if you do it too much, or if you do it
too
a
much.
lot, or if you do it a lot. Too much is kind of a relative term too.
Yeah, because I know the word systemic racism really scares right-wing people. I don't know why.
Well, because of the way it sounds, like whiteness studies.
Well, I know the way it sounds is bad. I think we all know that big R racism is bad.
Yeah.
But one of the things that CRT says is racism is normal. I kind of feel that that's the case. And when they're not talking about big R racism, they're talking about little r racism.
Okay.
Like, they're trying to expand racism because racism is really complex. Um, I think one of their arguments is they were talking about is like, okay, Eskimos have 200 names for snow or something.
Mm-hmm.
Such a simple thing, but we only have one word to describe racism. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like really thinking hard about that. And that's kind of right. Like, how many words do we have to describe being tricked? There are so many words to describe that.
Yeah.
Like fraud. What types of fraud are there? Tomfoolery, haberdashery. There's just so many goddamn
But
words.
those are
Bamboozled.
synonyms for the same word. Are you talking about isn't expanding of the
Well, we have
definition?
wire fraud. We got like elder fraud. There's like so many different types of fraud.
Right, right.
Yeah, I think one of their say is like there's so many different types of racism, but it's all couched under one word. That's the problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well that makes sense. Like obviously there's going to be a hell of a lot of variation in terms of the severity of someone's racism. Like it could be anything from like the Airbnb example you said, like someone not wanting to rent their place to a black person, for anything from that to like literally someone going out and like tarring and
Shooting.
feathering and hanging black people or some
Right.
shit, right? So
Yeah. So I think it's just the problem is when a right winger thinks of the word racism, they just think of, oh, there's only one version, the big R, and nothing else exists. And CRT is like, no, there's a little r, tiny r. Um, the only problem is that we only have this one word to describe it. So whenever we say it, um, everyone thinks on the right that we're talking that we have to refer to big R, but there aren't enough words to describe that. So they just use the one R. And I get the argument. Yes, it's going to make the right uncomfortable because they don't understand what that means. Um, because that word in itself makes the right very uncomfortable. Um, but yeah, when I looked into it deeper, it's not, oh, everything is racist. Like, no, not quite. That's not it. It's just it's kind of inherently in in our human system. I think it's just for some reason, the United States is overly sensitive and hyped on race. So it's a much bigger deal here than a lot of other places. And that's because, like I said, CRT is all about legal issues. So they examine a lot of racism that has been in the legal system. Like we're talking about the difference between, sentencing for crack cocaine versus regular cocaine.
mm, yeah.
Things that are disparities that are obviously designed for specific reasons. But
Hmm.
that's basically what
Yeah.
it is
I think like saying that like the way you phrased it, that like it's inherent within us to be racist, though that's like that's not necessarily false, but it's like it's an essentialist narrative, which is totally against the sort of thing that Foucault was talking about.
right. I think it's just something that cannot be escaped, and there's what they're saying. But yeah, I don't know. Essentialism, I think there has to be some essentialism, right?
I don't know, that's an essentialist statement.
I don't know. Maybe this is, like I said, they're trying to get to a post-racial society. And maybe when that post-racial society is there's no focus on this.
Well,
So,
this is part of why I think it's at least somewhat true that people are at least people discriminate, or at least are racist to various degrees. Like I think that I'm not sure. I'm not so sure that it's possible to achieve a post-racial society.
No, probably not. But if you want to, I think the post-racial society they want to have is something where a little r is like the biggest infraction that you find
That would be nice.
instead of like a big R, which is, blatant slurs and, obvious racism. Obvious racism versus little like biases. But even those little biases, they consider racism in CRT. So it's just that word is so scary to people. It's not scary to me because I already think everyone is racist, and that's based off of what my scale of racism is, which isn't what everybody's is. I
Yeah,
try
that's
to
the
be a bit,
problem. Like there are all these different terms that people define in different ways, like racism, discrimination, bias. They can all have varying degrees of similarity depending on how you define them.
yeah, and some of them they're not very well defined. Like they just aren't. It's not like we have a scientific scale of racism that we can refer to that determines, oh, if this happens, this is 10% racist, or if this happens,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
17% racist. Like we don't have that, so it's all
Yeah.
subjective anyway.
I think like if a white person kills a black person because they're black or vice versa, then that's probably like 100% racism.
Yeah, so whenever I go into discussion that's saying, oh yeah, I think everybody's racist, I always have to say, including myself. So
Yeah.
that's just to make sure that nobody gets offended, because when some people get called a racist, they get super offended by
I can understand.
that.
I can understand that because like a lot of people use it the way as like
Big R.
you have yeah exactly like you have terrible intentions and you hate people and like you are a bad white person who wants to go around hurting black people or something like that.
Right, right, right. But yeah, if I had that CRT book, I'd get it to you, but I don't have it. Um,
Okay.
Maybe one of my libraries has it. I can try and, well, actually, one of my libraries does have it. Unfortunately, they only have the ebook version.
Okay.
So I don't think I'd be able to get it to you. Only way I'd be able to get it to you is if you had a Kindle, and before you put that on your Kindle, you have to turn off the internet.
Right. Right. No, I don't have a Kindle. Maybe I
Uh,
can find some other sort of book like that that's more academic and not like a terrible, stupid abomination of a book like White Fragility.
yeah, the introduction to CRT is definitely an academic book. It's a textbook, so there's a lot of citing of Harvard law papers and a bunch of other stuff in there.
Okay.
Each chapter, it's like a full 2 minutes of them citing their sources. So yeah, it's decent to get an understanding of it. I'm not saying I'm all about CRT now. I certainly have my own criticisms about it.
You'd be
Uh,
the true woke centrist instead of an ironic woke centrist.
yeah, it's like I take basically the Bruce Lee principle of, hey, there's some useful stuff, I'll take that, but the stuff that isn't really that useful to me, I'll just kind of discard it.
Makes sense. That's what I do too.
So that's what I gathered with that. And yeah, that's it, man. That's all. I've just been getting into this racial stuff recently because of people getting into the tizzy of CRT. It's been a local, quote unquote, problem. So I want to see, of course, when there are things that are extremely complex, they're going to be reduced into the most ridiculous versions of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically what's happening with CRT.
Yeah.
The CRT is probably one of the most benign of the critical theories. I'm pretty sure some of those other theories get pretty wacky, but but this one is mostly based on legal stuff, so it's not that it's not like that wacky because you're going to take these theories into a courtroom. If you sound too wacky, you're going to lose.
I wonder, I wonder if it's like the same. I wonder if it's the same or different with, like for example,
Like fat
where
studies and all those.
yeah, like fat studies saying that, you know, morbidly obese people can be healthy.
Well, yeah,
healthy,
that's what I want to see too. Like,
or like you know, like if anyone says that, you know, there is absolutely no biological difference between men and women or something like that.
yeah, so I don't know if I really want to get into those other theories, but I almost have the inkling that from what I've heard of those theories is exactly what they did with CRT. They got like the most egregious and wacky versions of these and then kind of attacked those instead of like the basis of it. Because I said there's certainly criticisms of the basis of CRT. I've covered a couple of them, but um, like these wackier versions, like that White Ringers criticize, I don't see that in like the fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not present. So I don't know what to say about that. It's just I would kind of expect to read these other theories and be like, yeah, they got it wrong again. It's just some stupid crap that I really don't care about, but it's not that dangerous.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, it is what it is. I'm not here promoting CRT. I'm just saying there's some useful shit and there's some shit that's a little bit questionable.
Okay.
But I do that with it, pretty much everything. Like, and you know, you've dealt with that, the straw manning of postmodernism. You know
Certainly.
how it works. But even though you know there's some stuff in postmodernism that really isn't that useful, you know that.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
That's just how it goes with anything.
Mm-hmm.
Religion, there's useful stuff from religion. There's stuff that's a bit wacky and not really that useful.
Of course.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I view it. But if we're saying like, oh, if I read D'Angelo and that D'Angelo was CRT, I'd be like, this is some whack shit. But,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, that's not the vibe I got. So yeah, there we go.
All right.
All right, man. You want to go wrap it up? Do you have any plugs for today?
Yeah, sure. People can, if they want to, check out my YouTube channel, Mindgasms, where yesterday I talked with Chris James about, we were ostensibly going to talk about a bunch of foreign policy topics, and then we talked about a whole bunch of other topics as well. And we talked about this progressive infighting between Aaron Monte and the Young Turks about Assad's supposed Syrian chemical attacks, and America funding Saudi Arabia's genocide in Yemen, and how politicized all of these, including the Israel-Palestine situation, gets, and how complex they are, and how people on both sides of the political spectrum oversimplify things in that way. And then we talked about, you know, other similar things, like we talked about mixed mental arts and Jonathan Haidt and religion and militant atheists and Sam Harris, and how a lot of the problem with a lot of these issues that's similar is just tribalism. People get ideological and tribal about things, and then they, like we were talking about, they criticize straw mans of the other person's positions, and then they just endlessly do that, and then there's not really any resolution. It's just an increase of conflict. So we talked about all kinds of stuff like that. And then tomorrow, you and Chris is going to join us as well. We're going to talk about aliens and UFOs and all this, all these recent big stories that came out that have gotten people talking about aliens a lot. We're going to hear some of Dusty's stories from when he was a big conspiracy theorist and was more into this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, that'll be fun too. And then also, we talked about Jordan Peterson, a book, a little bit. I'm also next week going to put out my next video on Rule 2 of his 12 rules in his new book called Beyond Order. And yeah, I would say like with my video on the first rule, I would say I kind of have a bit of a nuanced opinion of the second rule. I like the sentiment of it, but I don't like where it goes after that about like evangelizing about Jesus and stuff like that.
That was a rule. That's part of it.
Yeah, basically, kind of similar as the first one. But yeah, I like this book more than 12 Rules of Life, but less than his first book, Maps of Meaning. Like I often say. So yeah, check out that and like I said, be talking with Dusty and Chris about aliens on Mindgasms tomorrow. And I think Dusty's got my Twitter in the description there. And my Instagram is Andrew Mindgasms. And you can find me on Facebook at Andrew Meintzer, Meintzer for the last name. And then check out Mindgasms on Patreon if you want to give me money, which would be awesome. And also, you can check out mindgasms.bplifetime.com, which is my blog where I publish chapters of my novel that I'm writing and short stories, poems, and vlogs about some of the ideas that we talk about, like philosophy, history, science, politics, philosophy, that sort of thing. And yeah, that's everything.
All right. Well, great. Yeah. Join us tomorrow for some UFO speak. It's going to be fun.
And are we going to talk about Path of Daggers next week?
Yeah, Path of Daggers next week. So that's the second of 3 parts that we'll be talking about. That is book 8 in the Wheel of Time saga. That will be next week with me, Tristram, and you, hopefully. Because it's going to be early. So you have to prepare for that. And then past that, did you want to dive into Castlevania again? Season 2? All right, so that'll be coming up in a couple weeks. All right. So, yeah, thank you guys for watching. Check out Andrew's channel. It is great. Subscribe and hit that bell. And hey, you guys want to comment. I'll answer any and all comments basically, unless it's like some spam bullshit.
Me
If
too.
it's spam bullshit, I'll just delete it. If it's like a legitimate comment,
comments that I don't address are some that I've had on my videos, like people talking about QAnon shit or something like that.
Yeah, I'll address QAnon shit, but I won't be like, oh yeah, that's great. No. But yeah, that's going to be next
Tell
week.
me about how the government's kidnapping children.
But yeah, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. Share. And yeah, fucking Castlevania is pretty goddamn awesome. And CRT isn't the biggest boogeyman that everyone makes it out to be. But oh yeah, and Andrew, send me that link to the Wisecrack guys.
Yeah, I'll do that right away once we finish this. Yeah.
All right, so take it easy, everyone. You have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow on Andrew's channel.
Yep. Adios until next time, everyone.
All right. Bye.
All right.